You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious? I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 600 for September 2nd, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy, and I cannot believe that number is real.
It is real. We have done 600 of these main show episodes. I think collectively, between the main show, Extra Film over the years, Women in Session Now, Chasing the Gold, our awards podcast, collectively, I think we're up to around, we're north of 1,500 episodes.
I was going to say, yeah, we're definitely over 1,000. You lump in the individual reviews that we're doing now with
and
the new format.
Those as well, yep.
That's adding so much content out there.
Absolutely. So there's certainly a lot of episodes to check out if you are subscribed to the podcast. And if you are, we really do appreciate you joining us here each and every week. But yes, this is 600 of these main show episodes. And
Indeed.
What a fun way to celebrate as we get into our best of the decade for the 2000s. And to be clear, because there's been some confusion on social media, we're talking about a decade, best of the decade. So 2000, the year 2000 through 2009.
Yeah.
This has been 9 years leading up to this moment. I somewhat talked about this last week on the show, but in case you missed it, Brendan and I, of course, we do this in real time each year. We review all of these movies. At the end of the year, we have our InSession Film Awards where we talk about our favorite performances and direction and cinematography, and then we get into our top 10 movies of each year. We do that in a real-time sense, of course.
Yeah.
However, because we have so much fun doing that, back in 2015, we thought, because we are having a lot of fun, let's retroactively look back at all of these other years.
Yeah.
And we'll go backwards. So as much as we're going forwards, we're going backwards simultaneously.
Because it's not confusing at all. Yeah. We're Christopher Nolaning this, basically.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of going forwards and backwards. We're tenanting this as we go.
I was going to say memento. We're mementoing this.
A little bit of both, for sure.
Yeah.
Either way, however you want to decipher that, we decided to go backwards. Starting in 2015, we did our 2009 retrospective. And then it was about 6 months later as we got to 2008, which is why it's been 9 years, not necessarily 10 years.
The math doesn't quite add up. Yeah, it got to a point where we did ultimately decide only one retrospective per year makes the most sense.
Yes, the 6 month gap was just too small.
Yeah.
So we decided, you know what, we'll just do one at the end of the summer. We'll let it be a yearly exercise. So over the last 9 years, we've been counting back from 2009 all the way now to the year 2000. And with the retrospective last week, that rounds out the decade. So here we are with our best of the decades show. We did this for the 2010s as we transitioned from 2019 to 2020. That was a really fun show as well. One of my
that was great.
Favorite episodes that we did in 2020. That was a really hectic year, of course.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Which
so
means
that one does stand out.
sometime soon we're going to have to do a best of the 21st century episode, right? A full-on concoction of everything.
Yeah, at some point maybe we'll get to that. We'll veer off into the 90s starting next year.
Oh my gosh,
however,
the 90s. My childhood.
I know, our childhood coming back in full form. However, we're here to celebrate the decade that is the 2000s, which was equally formative for us. We've talked about that quite a lot in these various retrospectives over the years, and I'm very excited to dig into the best that the decade had to offer. As always, this is a stressful exercise. Brendan and I have put in a ton of work in terms of gathering our nominees, our winners, our top 10 that we'll get to at the end of the show.
Yeah.
It's going to be wild. Yeah. And for those that listen to our yearly award shows that we do in January, this is going to be very familiar. It'll be somewhat condensed as we begin the first half of this episode, digging into our the awards categories, if you will.
Yeah.
So we will be talking about best cinematography, best director, acting, writing, all of that stuff.
All that good stuff. There will not be a part 1, part 2 like we do with those
this
other
will be all one collective episode, so strap in. We're going to be
7
here
hours. Yeah. Please stay along for the ride, people. Yeah, we're going to be tired by the end of this.
It's going to be fun. Now, to help with that, and we did this for our Best of the Decade show for the 2010s as well, we are foregoing our unique categories. Well, what are those? If you're new to the show, at the InSession Film Awards, we also have, in addition to the conventional categories, we have our individual awards. Yeah. Meaning the made up categories that Brendan and I do separately from each other. Yeah. We also have best movie discovery, best surprise actor or actress, best surprise movie, best overlooked movie, and one of my favorites, best opening or closing credit sequence or scene.
Yeah.
Those are really fun categories. We are not going to be doing that on this episode. However, we are going to be having an additional episode in lieu of reviews this week. We are dedicating this entire week to this Best of the Decade show. Yeah. So instead of reviews, the next episode to follow this one will be Brendan and I going through those unique categories. And we will also be revisiting our top 10 list for each of the years that that make up this decade. So we're going to be revisiting them. We might be reshuffling a lot of them.
Oh,
and we'll talk about those changes.
I already have to laugh because I got me some changes to talk
about. I got some changes. I got some changes. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
And there's definitely a theme with my changes. I'll simply say that. But you'll notice some years versus others have more changes than others. And there's a key reason for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I'll never really know the answer because there were some major blind spots that for whatever reason I did not get to in some of these previous retrospectives. Yeah. I will never, unless I get a time machine, I'll never be able to go back to figure out why I ended up missing some of these. But that's the fun of doing this show is, okay, well, we're prepping for Best of the Decade. Here are a few that I've missed. Yeah. Let's watch those and see where they fall in line. And some of them, at the very least, they've become a big part of the reshuffling of my top 10 list.
There's a lot of reasons for that. On one hand, for at least myself, I'll catch up with some of these other blind spots without the intent of them being blind spot catch up, right? I never saw, I don't know, The Beaches of Agnes, for instance. I'm going to watch that again, or I'm going to watch that for the first time just because I hadn't seen it. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I had that as a blind spot for that particular year. That was a bad thing I did. So it's like you kind of accidentally discover them. Yeah.
That's a great example. Another one I can think of was 35 Shots of Rum. Why didn't I catch up with that in 2009 when we did that retrospective? Or maybe I did, and I just didn't write down in my notes that I watched it, or I certainly didn't log it on Letterboxd. I had no recollection of.
Maybe you just didn't know it came from that year, and there have been examples of that for me as well.
Absolutely.
Or there are many examples of movies that you just find yourself appreciating differently as you get older.
That's it too. Some rewatches help. Yeah, and just simply lingering on these films, thinking about them, and as the years go by, they just resonate with you differently. And that simply tends to reshuffle things, which is why, again, we always go back to that idea that these lists, even the categories that are top 10 that we're going to reveal here, it's always in flux. It's a time capsule. That's what this
so in
is.
flux.
This is how we feel about the best of the decade of the 2000s right now. If we were to revisit this show in another 10, 15, 20 years, I'm sure things would change.
Well, yeah, and honestly, knowing that has made these exercises less stressful for me. Really, the stress now is just making sure, okay, have I seen enough to really do this right? Have I done the right research to make sure I'm not forgetting anything? That's really the stress, but it's not so much about, oh, I have to make sure I get this right. So that way 10 years from now, I look at this list and it's still the same. It's like, honestly, that's
exactly.
And I used to have that mindset. And thankfully I've learned to, kind of, push that other person away and never let him resurface.
Yeah. You'll never perfect it.
No.
But you do make a really great point. We put in so much work into these retrospectives or even our year-end awards that we do, even though it'll change as time goes, but you want it to be as full as possible.
You want it to be
like, I put in a lot of work
way.
into this just to say, I know that I put as much effort into that as I could. Even if things change, it's as full as I feel like it could be.
Yeah.
And I think that makes for a rich experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot to talk about. We have a lot of films and a lot of great talent to talk about. I'm looking forward to this one. This was a cool decade.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
This was a great decade because, as you mentioned in the opening there, before we're going to eventually get to the 90s at some point later on, the 2000s were still formative years for you and I. I mean, we were both children of the 90s, but a lot of us and a lot of our colleagues as well that are around our age, both of us are in our mid to late 30s. We were coming of age in the 2000s in some way. So our artistic minds, the things that we gravitated towards artistically, were also forming at that time, which is why many of the movies that we're going to be talking about here, at least for me, I mean, I could tell you right now, my top 20 of the 2000s are all probably somewhere in my top 100 of all time. Like we're talking about movies that are all-timers for us, and we grew up with a lot of these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. These are certainly in the conversation for all time, especially those at the very top. And because we did grow up with many of these, some of them I certainly did not. Some of the films I'm going to be talking about, I did not catch up with until well into my adulthood. But that's part of the fun here. It is a little bit of a concoction of growing up and experiencing these in real time, but also catching them up and viewing them through the prism of being an adult.
Yeah.
All right. So as we get into this, again, just to reiterate, and if this is your first time experiencing the InSession Film Awards with us,
hopefully we don't scare you off.
For each category, we will each individually have our own 5 nominees and a selected winner. So Brendan's nominations and winners could be and likely will be for some categories very dissimilar than mine. And that's what makes our show, I guess, a little bit different in that way.
Yeah.
So as far as the categories, again, the unique ones, as I laid out earlier, we'll be doing that in an episode that follows this one.
Yeah.
As far as the official categories, we're going to be talking about best use of soundtrack, music. That could be original or pre-existing. So that is still a little distinctive to us. The rest of these you already know. It's best original score, best animated film, best international film, best documentary, best cinematography, adapted screenplay, original screenplay, director, supporting actor and actress, and then we will end with best actor and actress. That'll be the first half of this episode, and then we will quickly turn around and talk about our top 10 movies of the decade.
Did you intend to say quickly in that manner? It sounded very tongue-in-cheek, as if to say, yeah, quickly. Yeah, right. This ain't going to be quick.
Yeah, it's certainly not going to be quick, but we'll do our best to be concise.
We'll try.
And to be limited here, but we're going to have fun, and we'll talk about these nominees and winners in a way that, gives it justice. That's what we're here to do. We're here to celebrate
the
these
show
movies.
going. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. All right. With that laid out, Brennan, anything else before we get started? Or are you ready to go?
Oh, I mean, am I ready to go? That's a very, very loaded question. I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I mean, I just got back from vacation, so I didn't get much time to really put as much time and effort into this. Every time I found an opportunity, I basically had to babysit one of my wife's brother's kids who are at that age where they're just craving attention. Their youngest son, we call him Blazer. He's basically the kid from Big Daddy right now. He's at that particular age. So I'm there trying to, I want to try and get some of these categories put together. I've got my laptop on me, and he basically comes in yelling kangaroo show. Is basically what he does.
Welcome to my world. Absolutely.
Yeah. I do want kids someday. I'm not trying to frown on children. I do want them someday.
Yeah, you have to be very intentional when you have kids about finding the time and space.
Everything's on a schedule.
Absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah, I imagine so many timers are just going to be going off. It's like, okay, I need my moment for this right now.
All right. As we get going here, because we're going to be throwing out a lot of nominations, if you miss anything, we will be having a post on the website at InSessionFilm.com later this week that list all of these nominees and winners. So don't worry. Even if you miss it here, you can go and check it out on the website. You can see it laid out in a very clear fashion. And also, I just want to reiterate, on episode 598, so 2 episodes ago, we also did best scenes of the decade. If you want to go and check that out as well. That was a little appetizer leading into this show here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. With all of that laid out, let's begin our best of the decade for the 2000s. Again, 2000 to 2009. We are starting off here with best use of soundtrack music. As I noted a moment ago, this could be an original song. It could be a pre-existing song, but any song that is non-score used in the film to enhance the experience.
Yeah.
Because sometimes a pre-existing song can go a long, long way. So with that said, Brendan, what are your 5 nominees?
Coincidentally, my 5 nominees mostly ended up being ones that were unique or specific to the film that they served. So I guess in some ways they could qualify as quote unquote original songs. That just happened to work out that way. My nominees are A Waltz for a Night by Julie Delpy and Before Sunset, Hard Out Here for a Pimp by 3 6 Mafia and Hustle and Flow, Death to Birth by Michael Pitt and Gus Van Sant's Last Days.
Okay.
When Your Mind's Made Up by Glenn Hansard and Marketa Araglova and Once, and then Les Festines by Camille and Michael Giacchino from Ratatouille. And in my top 5 scenes of the decade, I had Hard Out Here for a Pimp by 3 6 Mafia. So that is the one I'm actually picking here, because how often do you get to say 3 6 Mafia are a bunch of award winners?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But again, like with that scene that we talked about on episode 598, there's something about the DIY musical process that just gravitates towards me. I mean, for those watching on YouTube, I've got the lovely bass guitar in the background once again, so hopefully that's at least a correlation you can understand. So that's another reason why I keep going for it here. I love this song. I love this scene. I love saying 3 6 Mafia as an awards winner. So that's another reason why I'm going with it here.
It is wild to me. Those words, 3 6 Mafia, Oscar winners.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. Like, I just will never get over
incredible.
that. But here's the thing. That song goes hard. It's really good.
That song rocks.
It's really fantastic.
It's a banger. It's a banger.
It is really great. I am not one to go backwards unless it's in a retrospective setting, as we're doing here. However, I do want to go back to a world where the Academy recognized 3 6 Mafia as an Oscar winner, or Eminem. Like, why can't we get those type of artists back in the conversation? I want to go back to that.
I would love
I was
to
thinking
see
about it.
artists
I was
like
thinking
that
about it earlier because I was doing some homework and again just reflecting on the decade. And in that same conversation, I thought of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince earned an Oscar nomination for Best Cinematography.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That is wild. And that film is really well shot. I love that nomination. That today would never happen. Would never happen today.
You got
I don't
the
know
great
why. It's just a different academy. But I kind of want to go back to that academy.
Yeah, well, when you have cinematographers like Bruno Delbonnel going so hard for a Harry Potter movie of all things,
Crazy.
It's just incredible.
And look, the changes that the academy has made over the last almost 10 years at this point was absolutely necessary. We needed to have the changes that we've seen over the last 10 years.
Yeah,
but I still want to see them recognize artists like 3-6 Mafia, movies like Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Can we please at least get back to that as well? Kidding. That's all I'm asking.
well, I mean, we're still getting movies like Dune nominated for Best Picture, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, but we don't see it as often, I guess. You know, there is a time and place, and this is something we talk about a lot with the 2000s in general. This particular decade, blockbuster filmmaking just meant something so different.
Oh, we'll get to that. I guess for some inside baseball, I wanted to do our individual awards on this episode, and we had to move it to our unique categories that we're going to do tomorrow as we are recording this. But part of why I wanted to do that is exactly what Brendan is saying. I am going to, spoiler alert, I'm going to have a big part of that when we get to my individual special awards.
That makes a lot of sense. That's something we can talk about a long time on. So I look forward to that.
So Brendan opening that can of worms here.
You're welcome.
All right, moving to my nominees here. I also have A Waltz for a Night, Julie Delpy, Before Sunset. I also have It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, 3-6 Mafia, Hustle, and Flow. We will differ, though, here on these last three. I'm also going to go to the movie once, but I'm going to go to the song Falling Slowly.
Okay.
Glenn Hansard and Marketa Arglova. The Soggy Bottom Boys. Oh, brother, where art thou? I'm a man of constant sorrow.
Almost went with that one. What a
moment. Couple of moments, really, with that song in that film. And then my last nominee here is My Favorite Things, sung by Bjork, Dancer in the Dark.
Almost went with that as well.
And what I love about these nominees is that, to me, it's a great example of why we include original song and pre-existing music.
Yeah.
It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, impeccable in that film. My Favorite Things, devastating in Dancer in the Dark. Not an original song for that movie, but can you think of anything that would work better in that moment for that character in that film? Absolutely not.
No, but the reprise of that song in particular in that moment in the prison cell is
great.
Devastating. Absolutely devastating.
Absolutely devastating. So pre-existing and original, that's what I love so much about this category.
Yeah.
As much as I love 3-6 Mafia, though, my winner here is Falling Slowly from Glenn Hansard and Marketa Arglova for the film Once. I absolutely love this moment, and there's something so entrancing about it to me, where you have girl and guy played by Arglova and Hansard respectively, and they meet in this music shop, and she simply asked him to start playing one of his songs, and they go over the progressions of the song, and it's so remarkably endearing. Their chemistry on screen is so wonderful. And as they begin to play the music, the romanticism, potential romanticism, is manifested musically in this incredible way that releases an enthusiasm for music that is almost hard to describe. It is palpable to see them and how they go about playing this song. Like, there's a passion for it, even though this is a song that Guy has played, who knows, hundreds
many
of times.
times. Yeah, but not in this way. Not
But
with someone on piano like this. Yeah.
Exactly. And he's singing it like he's singing it for the first time. Like, there's such this deep passion for the song in this moment that just, it's like it gives it new meaning to him. And the way John Carney shoots it with the camera, I think, is elegant and charming simultaneously. He simply lets it unfold organically. He captures the connection between those two characters in a way that feels real.
Yeah.
And there's something about the setting of a music shop that is symbolically appropriate. It's this space that is all about music, where the only strings attached are those tethered to the instruments. I love the intimacy of it. I love the music. The song itself is fantastic. It's all about the art and the craft and how those two characters connect over that specifically.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
You know what's so great about it too? You're right that it's almost as if Guy is performing it for the first time. It's because he has to perform it in a way where now he's required to listen to someone else do it simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's not just the performing of it. It's the fact that you have two artists who have to learn how to listen to each other, which is a huge component of, improvisation when it comes to music. Like that idea of listening to each other is very crucial in making that work. One of my favorite moments of this sequence, it's not even the music part of it. It's when he's showing her the chords and he says something like, yeah, so that's a C chord. And she goes, yes, I can see that, in a very playful kind of way. But it actually weirdly establishes her credibility even more, because that means she also knows how to play guitar. So, not just piano, so it actually showcases that they're experts in multiple musical fields. Little details like that, I think, make the scene really, really special for sure.
It's so good, and it certainly helps that the song is beautiful.
Oh,
Absolutely deserved the Oscar. I love it, and it is my winner here for best use of soundtrack music. All right, let's get to a category that has been impossible for me to figure out. That is best original score. I had the most trouble narrowing this one down.
I don't know what to do.
I still am at a loss, honestly. Like this one, truly, truly difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know where to begin. Good luck, Brendan. All the power to you.
I have five nominees that might change depending on what your five nominees are. So let's see.
I hear you.
Let's see. So I've got Nick Cave and Warren Ellis for The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford.
Okay.
I have Tun Dune for Hero.
Okay.
Johnny Greenwood for There'll Be Blood.
Okay.
Joe Hisaishi for Spirited Away.
Okay.
And John Williams for Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Oh, God. You've just made this so much more difficult for me.
You're welcome. Let me ask, you before I went into my five, did you at least have a five or a list of five nominees that you felt okay about, or was it just kind of a mess to begin with?
I mean, I have five that I feel good about.
Okay.
The problem is there's another dozen that I also want in the five.
I know. Oh, yeah. Yep. I know what you mean.
Including several, if not all five that you mentioned there. So
I mean, we could talk about this more off the cuff. I mean, I was trying to squeeze in Michael Giacchino for either Up or Ratatouille, or Thomas Newman for WALL-E, or Danny Elfman for Spider-Man 2. There's so many others here I was really trying to consider, or heck, Howard Shore for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I ended up going with those five because I feel like they all represent different musical avenues that give them like some sort of distinction, even if I think, let's say, what Howard Shore is doing for the Lord of the Rings is certainly more skilled and operatic than some of these others. It's I don't know, it's not to say one's better than the other, it's just these are the ones that I respond to. These are the musical scores I listen to more often, that I think maybe serve their respective films in a particular way, which is why my winner here is actually for Nick Cave and Warren Ellis for The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. It feels it's a score that feels more like individual melodies, or almost like individual songs, as opposed to a musical score. Like everything actually has a very particular rhythm to it. And I like scores that do that, especially ones that are taking place at a different time, as if it's really trying to mirror the almost like the campfire vibe in a way. And I think their music really does the best in taking me to a new place and also fitting the melancholy of that overall story. And on top of that too, I'm a huge Nick Cave fan. I love Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. As we're recording this, they just released a new album and I'm loving it. So perhaps they're just really top of mind for me right now, and that's why I'm giving it to them, which might be unfair. but if that's enough of a justification for me to at least get through this particular category, I'm taking it. So that's why I'm going that direction.
Man, you've made this so much more difficult for me.
All right.
I will say.
I'm just imagining the like if you ever watch SpongeBob SquarePants when the narrator comes in and says 2 hours later. We're just gonna be sitting at this category still.
Well, okay. I'm going to talk this out as I go. So please bear with me as we go here. This is, again, for new listeners, this is my favorite category. At the Oscars, at the InSession Film Awards, I love it.
Yeah.
For context, when I listen to music outside of even doing this show, primarily all I listen to is film music.
Yeah.
So I love this. Like, this is a world that I live in. I'm not a composer, obviously. I'm not a musician. I couldn't begin to articulate how any of it works. Brendan is the musician among the two of us. All I know is I love film scores. That's what I listen to. I just, it puts me at peace. It calms me. It makes me excited. I love it. It just reminds me of the art and my passion for film. And I love living in that world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, there's 15 scores here that I really want to be nominated. I will say this, there are a few that are hard in stone. One of them is Hero as well. I have Hero from Dun. I'm completely with you there. That one is set in stone.
Okay.
The Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore, set in stone here as well. The other three, I could interchange them with something else.
It's like a 3-sided die at this point.
A little bit.
Or a 20-sided die, I think is even more appropriate there.
So I'm struggling here. I am struggling. Well, and here's part of the problem as well, and why in some ways, I know for time, we couldn't fit them in our unique categories. But the reason I go back to that and why I typically love doing this for our yearly end show is it gives context to some of these categories that come later.
Yeah.
Because one of my nominees, I'll spoil this already, one of my nominees for Best Movie Discovery is Clint Mansell. He had a phenomenal decade.
That's true.
Between Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain, The Wrestler, and Moon, among others, but those four especially, incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. An incredible coming of age, so to speak, in terms of being a film composer.
Yeah.
And because of that, because he had such a great decade, I really want to reward him with a nomination. The problem is there's certainly there's another dozen here where, okay, if I left out Requiem or The Fountain and replaced it with something else, could I sleep at night? Maybe.
I feel like that's the worst, is when you are not sure if you can sleep at night from whatever change you made.
That's where it gets hard. Because again, some of these others I also want in here. Another nominee I have here is The Village, James Newton Howard. Oof. Absolutely love that.
Oof.
It's a score that I've always loved, but I recently revisited that film and it's like I fell in love with that score all over again.
Yeah, in a completely new way, because now you love the movie.
Yeah, even more so than I did before.
Right.
Do I want to remove that for, let's say, something like Wall-E or Old Boy or the assassination of Jesse James? Like there's, I don't know. Like this is me figuring this out in real time. So I apologize to everybody out there.
This means we got to fly through the remaining categories after this.
We're gonna have to. I'm also going to have to call this my Steve Jablonsky Memorial Award because
here we go.
Steve Jablonsky was a discovery for me. I absolutely love his work in the Transformers films, especially. Like, again, say what you will about those films. I honestly don't care. But his music is elite in those movies. And they have a personal resonance to me as far as, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, growing up with these movies and coming of age as a film cinephile. Those scores were a big part of that experience for me in the 2000s.
For sure. Yeah.
I don't have it nominated here, but that's why I'm calling this my Steve Jablonsky Memorial Award.
Hey, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay, I'm going to go with these 5. Hero, 10 Dunn. The Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore. The Village, James Newton Howard. Pirates of the Caribbean, Hans Zimmer and Klaus Badalt. Those scores, I don't care what kind of movie you're talking about. They are incredibly fun and some of the best I've ever heard.
I mean, marching bands are still playing that main theme.
Still playing all the time. And it's great. Like, we revisited those films. We talked about them during the pandemic, and those scores still hit so hard. Oh,
that trilogy rules. That trilogy rules. It's so good.
It's so good. And look, I am cheating a little bit with both Pirates and Lord of the Rings because I am including those trilogies as part of my nomination.
I mean,
here.
yeah, I could have done the same thing with John Williams and Harry Potter and just said at least like the first 3 movies, but there's so many new themes that come about in Prisoner of Azkaban that I feel like I can at least separate that one out. Yet I can understand the lumping of Lord of the Rings films together because they really are one experience.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So with this last one here, as much as I love Clint Mansell, and I guess he would be my number 6.
Okay.
And pick one, Requiem or The Fountain, either one. I could go with either one because I do think the main themes for those films are astonishing. Really, really great.
Sure.
But I think I'm going to follow your lead and go with John Williams and his work for Azkaban here.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think I'm going to do it as my 5th nomination here.
You know, I almost had him nominated like maybe at least 3 times. He's done so many great scores this entire decade. I almost could have considered him for AI or Catch Me If You Can. You know, some other great scores there. He's just he's a monster of a composer.
He is. The main Harry Potter theme is really great, but there's so many new cues in that film specifically that give it such a wider range than the 2 movies that came before it.
Yeah.
And I just fall in love with those new cues. Like, it's such a varied score that I think is really great. So, I mean, when I was thinking about this category a lot in terms of the decade and blockbuster filmmaking and how great it was for that decade, especially.
Yeah.
Because Lord of the Rings, Pirates, Harry Potter, like those scores, I genuinely believe hold up with anything else that came
Star
out
Wars. Yeah, they're basically
Star
like
Wars.
they have that same iconic status that Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark had in their respective decades.
Yeah,
it's very much the 2000s version of those themes.
Yeah, you know, exactly. Because I want to sit here and like a part of me wants to like delve into like the pretentious cinephile thing and go, well, there will be blood. There's the assassination of Jesse James. There's all of these other scores. Maybe you can include Requiem and the Fountain and all of that. You can't sit there and tell me though that Lord of the Rings, Pirates, Potter, Danny Elfman's Spider-Man 2, you're really going to tell me that doesn't hold up with any of these other like quote unquote more artful scores in the decade?
No, they just do things in different ways. Yeah,
they do. And that was the battle in my mind because I was sitting here going, look, I love all of these like more artful scores as well. Like I want to include them. Yeah. Like I said, this has been a huge struggle for me. I do, but
do you even have a winner?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I had a winner. Having a winner was never my issue here. It was how do I land these 5 nominees? Because because it was a map. And every time I would listen to a new one, I'd replace it with something else. Like it was just this cycle.
I feel like we need to have a new rule in place whenever we do these award shows is when we have a clear winner, but we can't figure out how to do our 5 nominees, we just don't do any nominees and just announce a winner.
Just announce
we move
maybe
on.
that's what I should have done. And look, my winner here is The Lord of the Rings. It's Howard Shore.
Okay.
I mean, you talk about something so iconic, something so distinct and memorable, and a score that perfectly complements the story's scope and scale. I mean, this is a work of art. And again, I'm talking about all 3 movies here, but the ranges and tones from the intimate and poignant to bombastic and urgent to horror and tension at times. It is incredible how he captures all of that in the score, and how many memorable, again, iconic themes come from the scores from these films. I mean,
a lot.
So many. Like you don't even you play 5 seconds of any one of these cues, and you already know which movie it comes from. You already know it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Well, that's how I feel about Prisoner of Azkaban. You can hear the main theme and know it's Harry Potter, but the theme from any Harry Potter movie I listen to the most is Buckbeat's Flight. That is the theme from that whole franchise I listen to the most, and there are individual moments like that that just have such an iconic representation of that franchise that The Lord of the Rings is also doing in its own way. Howard Shore is doing the same thing, and it's certainly the most sprawling musical score of the entire decade, which is why it needs to at least be acknowledged in some way here.
I agree. Another track from that score that I think about a lot is A Window to the Past.
Yeah.
It's accompanied with the scene with Lupin and Harry on the bridge, and they're talking about Harry's parents. It is breathtaking, that piece of music. It is incredible how much emotion it gives to that moment. It's fantastic. And you hear it a couple more times throughout the film, but that theme accompanied with everything else that that's why I really struggled, because I'm like, okay, well, I already have Lord of the Rings. I have Pirates. I don't think I'm budging on those 2. Should I go with Danny Elfman or Harry Potter? Like, do I include another blockbuster franchise from the decade? Like, I feel like I need to make room for There Will Be Blood or Jesse James or something here. That was the struggle. And also, I couldn't relent on Hero. Are you kidding me? No way. No way I was relenting on Hero.
Ton Dune, so good. So good at his job.
That's right. And then it's like The Village was right there as well. Like, that's why it was a struggle, because it was like, but at the end of it, it was like, I've just come to the conclusion that the blockbuster scores from this decade are just truly legendary. And I think are among the best film score work.
I agree.
Like, period. Just end the conversation there.
We don't see that as much anymore. We don't see blockbuster scores just having that type of memorability or being that memorable as they used to be. They occasionally come and go, but they don't. Even when we first saw Harry Potter back in the 2000s and we heard that theme, you knew you were hearing something special. You just knew it. And man, did that happen a lot back in the 2000s.
I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
And like the blockbuster filmmaking from the 2000s really stand out because of, one, how good the CGI was then and is, of course, it holds up compared to a lot of today's work. But that's also part of it. Like, what can you name a blockbuster that has such a varied and iconic and memorable score like we got from the 2000s? Like, I feel like even the Avengers films, like that first Avengers comes in to 2012, so it's not
it's not too far removed. Yeah, it's still like riding the coattails of the 2000s era before it would transition into something more content based as opposed to movie based. It was still it was in between those two worlds.
I agree. So like Endgame and those movies are like, and I do love the score to Endgame, but a lot of it is reliant on riding the coattails of the 2000s.
Yeah.
But aside from that, Like I love Giacchino's score for War for the Planet of the Apes, but that feels singular. You know,
It
it's
feels
different
singular,
from the
but
other two.
but it also feels like I don't even see those movies as blockbusters anymore in a weird way.
Yeah,
like they're
exactly.
too drowned out by anything Marvel and Star Wars based that I don't even see those movies as blockbusters now. So
Yeah.
it's like I barely want to qualify them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's certainly exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
Don't get us wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone, we're aware that Mad Max.
We're
Fury
aware.
Road
We're
has an
aware.
awesome
We know.
score.
We know.
Furiosa has an awesome score. Yeah, Dune.
It does.
Great.
It does. Dune has a great score.
You know, like there are exceptions to
They
the
are
rule,
out there. They are out there. They're
but
just.
broadly, it just doesn't seem as like the scope isn't there as it used.
It doesn't
to be.
feel like we're not getting one every year. Where I feel like in
Yeah.
the 2000s we were getting something like that every year.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. All right, let's move on because we spent a lot of time on that category.
Hey, it just gives us an excuse to run through these and explain them less.
Exactly. All right, best animated film. What do you got for this category?
Oh, this will be quick. This will be really quick. I have Fantastic Mr. Fox, Mary and Max, Ratatouille, The Triplets of Belleville, and Wall-E. And my winner is Ratatouille. I've talked about Ratatouille a lot. I think for those who actually listen to the show pretty actively know that Ratatouille is probably going to have a place in my top 10 for the decade. Spoiler, it's there. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, there you go. I can get through these quickly as well. I have Ratatouille, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Wall-E, The Incredibles, and Up. I'm very Pixar heavy with
Well, this was the
this
this was
category.
the decade of Pixar where everything they
It
did
was.
was some version of a masterpiece.
Absolutely. I mean, we covered through these retrospectives all of the films you nominated, several others as well. And while I liked many of them, they just didn't register with me the same as Pixar's best in this decade.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, like I contemplated switching up with maybe one of those others, and it didn't feel right to me.
Hey, if it's in your 5, truthfully, why fight it?
Exactly. Exactly. So those are the 5 I landed on. This, as far as picking a winner, it was a little bit of a struggle here. This came down to Wall-E and Fantastic Mr. Fox for me. And
Okay.
flip a coin. And I did, and it landed on Wall-E. So that is my
All right, there
winner.
you go. This might not be the only time where we have to rely on a coin flip to pick an answer.
Yeah.
This might happen a few times.
This might happen a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, with those nominees, if someone came at me and said, Fantastic Mr. Fox, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not. But between those two, I'm with the slightest of edges, I'll go with Wall-E here. And I truly, it's one of the best animated films of all time. I'm on the record of Inside Out being my favorite Pixar film, but if there's anything that does beat it, it is Wall-E. It's obviously heart-melting. It's endearing. We love these characters. I love the Charlie Chaplin of it all. It's got a great social commentary underneath. And how can you not love the space dance sequence? I mean, it's
That's
just
why
an
I
all-time
almost
moment.
nominated Thomas Newman for score for just that
Oh
one
my God,
scene.
it's great. And I love the symbolism layered throughout this film as well with the lighter and
Divine
what that
dancing.
means. Yeah, the fire extinguisher, I think, has some great irony to it. I just love it's a very clever film. It's very smart. There's not a ton of dialogue. It's all visual storytelling, and it is impeccable. And with how the film utilizes that to tell the story. It's great.
Wall-E would have been my number 2 if I had to rank these 5 nominees for me. Ratatouille and Wall-E are my 2 favorite Pixar films. So it just made it that much more difficult. But Ratatouille I've always talked about a lot. But Wall-E is just, if there's one thing that gives me any interest or excitement in Toy Story 5, it's Andrew Stanton directing it. Even though I do think it's a safe choice, but his track record with Pixar is pretty masterful. So
Speaks for itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Good stuff there. Let's get to best international film. What do you got? What do you got here?
I guess, well, first off, I'll say we'll classify this in our own way because I know a film like The Diving Bell and the Butterfly didn't qualify as an international film at the Oscars simply given its production, but I am going to qualify it here. So The Diving Bell and the Butterfly
that's a good call. Yes.
I just want to make that known that we are aware of the criteria differences between what we're talking about here and what many award circuits consider an international film.
Yes.
But here, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is one of my nominees, alongside Hero, In the Mood for Love, Y Tu Mama Tambien, and Yi Yi. And my winner here, I'm going to keep this very brief because it's a movie I'm going to talk about quite a bit as this conversation keeps going. Y Tu Mama Tambien is my winner here. It's my favorite foreign language film of the year, and it's not even close.
Okay, good stuff there. This will give some insight into our next episode when we go over our reshuffling. If you're paying attention, for those that listened to last week's show, I'm not going to reveal it here. I'm just going to lay it out. And if anyone picks up on it, they'll know what they're getting into when we get to the reshuffling on the next episode. Or I guess part 2 of this.
Yeah.
My nominees here are Hero, Y Tu Mama Tambien, the Hirokazu creative film Nobody Knows, Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, Claire Denis' Boy, Beau Travail. Is my 5th nominee.
Okay.
My winner for this is In the Mood for Love, Wong Kar-wai.
Good movie.
Absolutely love it.
Great movie.
For reasons we may get to here in a little bit.
Well, reasons we've talked about a lot on this show.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about 2 of the best performances of the decade, the best direction, cinematography. This film will be mentioned more as we go. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, for me, it is the best.
This is what I love and hate about doing these award shows, is that on one hand, it gets us talking about these films in a nomination-like format, which is fun, but then it also takes away the suspense. Because it completely alludes to what we're going to talk about later.
We don't know when it's going to come up again. We just know that it is. So there's still some mystery there.
Yeah,
but it'll be brought up again. Yeah, let's just put it that way.
A few times.
In the Mood for Love, one of the best films of the decade. All right, let's get to best documentary. What do you got here?
My nominees are The Beaches of Agnes, Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, Grizzly Man, Man on Wire, and Tarnation are my 5 nominees.
Tarnation.
Yeah,
that was a fun visit. Yeah.
Yeah, that was. It's not a fun movie, but it was fun catching up with that movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I have such a soft spot for Agnes Varda, which is why my winner is The Beaches of Agnes, and I love the introspective side of her when it comes to this particular documentary. I think she's one of our best filmmakers for sure ever to have lived. And I think her documentaries are among the most fascinating, especially a movie like Faces Places from 2017. I think that was one of the best films of that decade. And The Beaches of Agnes is another great introspective example of what an artist sees and how they see themselves. So I love this film.
Yeah, it's a great film. I caught up with it this week, and it will be a factor in terms of the reshuffling of our list that we'll talk about.
Because it was a first-time watch for me not too long ago. I love Agnes Varda so much. It sort of hurt to admit that this is one I hadn't seen, and it's the one I decided. I'm going to try and. I'm going to try and fix this one blind spot, and I'm glad this is the one I chose.
Oh, it's very, very good. I love how biographical that it is, even if it's putting her outside of her comfort zone a little bit. I do really love that about the movie.
Yeah, same here.
It is a nominee for me as well. The Beaches of Agnes. My other 4 nominees here are Grizzly Man. I have that as well. Man on Wire. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. And spoiler alert, one of my nominees for best surprise movie of the decade, Murder on a Sunday Morning. My God, I love that movie. It's also one of the best comedies of the year as well, or of the decade.
You going on that rant for that movie was just
so
fun.
Good. It's so good. I'm telling you, that film, like when you read what it's about and you read that it won the Oscar, your expectations become something that the film is not at all.
I love that.
It's very different than what those expectations are.
It's hilarious.
Good stuff. My winner, though, here is James March's Man on Wire.
Okay.
About Philip Petit, which, Philip Petit demonstrates beautifully that sometimes a documentary is best when it takes a step back and just lets its subject matter be center stage, because his personality is so infectious. Just listening to him talk is incredible. But beyond his extremely endearing charm, we learn about the man and his ambition, what drives him, why he was desperate to perform this daring stunt between the Twin Towers. The archival footage is breathtaking and complimenting all of that as well. And it does a great job of giving this story spectacle, even though it's just a documentary, which is incredible, but how it balances that with its dramatic stakes, with the personal stakes of Petite. I just find all of that so spellbinding. It's a really nuanced documentary that's about the man as much as it is what he accomplished. And you just think about all of that through the prism of Petite's, again, just incredibly infectious personality. He's so much fun to watch, and I love it. It was in my top 10 for 2008, I believe that film came out.
Yes, it was 2008.
Absolutely adore it. It is my win here for best documentary.
Yeah, if you want to see this story, watch this one. Don't watch when Robert Zemeckis tried to.
Yeah, don't watch the Zemeckis film. Yeah, it's
Although
fine.
admittedly,
But
the ending is
awesome.
the ending is pretty thrilling for that movie, but the movie as a whole is not great.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's get to best cinematography. What do you have for this category?
Oh, this one I'm looking forward to. I'm actually pretty happy with these 5, and I think you could go in a very different direction. We'll have some crossover for sure, but my 5 nominees include Roger Deakins for insert movie here.
Sure. Yeah.
I do have. I mean, I feel like you can talk about either No Country for Old Men or the assassination of Jesse James or anything else he shot that year or even decade. I do have the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford as my nominee here. Yeah. I also have Christopher Doyle, Peng Li Kwang, and Ping Bin Lee for In the Mood for Love, Robert Elswit for There'll Be Blood, Emmanuel Lubezki for Children of Men, and Janusz Kaminski for The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. My winner goes to Christopher Doyle, Peng Li Kwang, and Ping Bin Lee for In the Mood for Love, primarily because it's the one that I feel like is serving the most symbolic purpose in the film that it's working with. And all of these cinematographers are doing things that serve their respective films, but the way that this movie looks, In the Mood for Love specifically, the look of the movie, the way the camera moves, the way it feels like an observer is practically a character. In many ways, it's kind of the main character, where our 2 leads almost feel like supporting characters to us, the observer. And the way that the movie is framed in that way, it adds to the sociopolitical tensions of Hong Kong in 1962 to 1966 that just make it such a crucial star of the movie. So that's why I have to give the award to this one here.
Yeah. Completely there with you. There is a theme with my nominees here for best cinematography, and in some ways I feel justified if I was to add a 6th because it would be appropriate. And I did not plan this. I simply listed the movies. These are the 5 that I think are the best representations of cinematography in the 2000s. Then you start to consider who is the DP and a theme abroad, because I also have In the Mood for Love, which, as you noted, features a trio here of Christopher Doyle, Peng Li Kwang, and Ping Bin Lee. I also have Christopher Doyle for Hero.
He was my 6th here. Yeah.
I doubled up on Christopher Doyle. You know who else doubled up here? Emmanuel Lubezki.
I was gonna say, of course he's gonna double up here.
Gonna double up on the Lubezki as well, because Children of Men and The New World are nominees for me. And again, I did not plan that out purposefully. It just happened to line out that way. So when it comes to Roger Deakins, who is my other DP here for the assassination of Jesse James, that's my last nomination. Maybe I should just throw in a 6th here, double up on the Deakins, and then I got 3 double hitters here.
I might allow that. Unless you decided to maybe go 3 for Emmanuel Lubezki and say, you know what, I'm going to throw Itu Mama Tambien.
Maybe I can do it too as well. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear that those guys had a tremendous decade.
Yeah. They were the cinematographers of this particular decade. I feel
For
like they're
sure.
the ones you talk about a lot.
For sure. Completely agree. My winner here, though, is In the Mood for Love. Incredible film. Stunning. The framing and composition is a character here. Oftentimes, the camera is framed behind some sort of wall to give it some sort of voyeuristic perspective, or it gives the film rich symbolism. We talked about this a little bit with our scenes of the decade a couple of episodes ago. I brought up the last role play sequence. That's just one example, but you think about the framing there, how so much of the individual compositions are the characters on one side of the frame and some sort of obstruction on the other side of the frame to give them some sort of claustrophobic feeling that accompanies how they're feeling internally. It's very thoughtful in that kind of way.
It's one of those movies, like, I don't know if you've ever had this reaction while watching In the Mood for Love, but let's say you're going to see a movie in a theater, any movie, and someone sitting in front of you stands up and you can't see the screen, and you find yourself tilting your head to try to see the screen, right? I do that all the time when I have to watch In the Mood for Love again. But there's no one standing in front of me because the way the camera, it's like you're trying to see the people that it's weirdly not focusing. But I love that about the film. I love that it allows me to participate in that way.
It is really inviting in that regard. I completely agree. But even beyond the framing and composition of it, the use of colors is exquisite. The red hues especially pop. It's very evocative in terms of the imagery, the color palette, the aesthetic of the film, the way the camera moves at times, how that reflects the emotional turbulence of the characters. It's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It is so gorgeously shot. Or even the way it captures them smoking at times, how that almost works in contrast of the beauty of the neon lights and the colors. It's just so good. So good. In the Mood for Love, my winner for best cinematography of the 2000s.
Good stuff.
All right, let's get to the writing categories. This, like original score, was difficult for me. I was able to narrow down my list of nominees here. I have 5. Unlike score, I do have 5 for each that I'm pretty confident in. However, picking a winner for these categories has been nothing short of a nightmare. I will have...
It's funny because I'm having the exact opposite reaction. Picking the winner was actually the easy part. Picking 5 nominees was the problem for me.
Fair enough. Yeah,
these were the 2 hardest categories for me for this entire exercise.
Yeah, these were hard too. Yeah. So let's get into them. We'll start with adapted. What do you have for best adapted screenplay?
And this one in particular, adapted screenplay, was the hardest one for me, to the point that I have 7 movies here that it's like I can't part with any of them. And the only way I could feel okay about parting with 2 to make my 5 is I had to give myself a really big asterisk when making these 5 nominees. And basically what I said was, if any one of these people were also nominated for Best Director, I might wait to talk about them in Best Director. To give different talents and different writers and different films more wealth, which is a very unfair way of nominating these movies. I recognize that, but we're talking about a full decade here. I want to talk about so many movies. I want to talk about as many movies as we can, and I don't want to repeat myself, even if I think, a movie like There Will Be Blood deserves to be both nominated for screenplay and direction. Like, I understand that. But I'm going to, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson a little bit later. So as far as my 5 nominees for adapted screenplay, I have David Benahoff for 25th Hour, Andrew Dominik for The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, Spike Jonze and Dave Eggers for Where the Wild Things Are, Richard Linklater, Julie Delpy, and Ethan Hawke for Before Sunset, and Alvin Sargent for Spider-Man 2.
Okay.
And again, hard to pick those 5. Easy winner for me, though. It's Before Sunset, because it's the one that feels the most like this is what script writing is. This is the kind of movie you watch in a script writing class, and how you can maintain a writing trajectory, but just between 2 characters. Doesn't matter where you are. It's weirdly cinematic for a film that's more or less taking the formula that you see with just two people in a room, but in this case, the room just happens to be all of Paris, which I think is really interesting. But the conversations that they have, I think, are the reasons why it's my favorite adapted script of the decade. For reasons we could talk about for hours, but I don't want to spend too much time doing that. But if you've seen the film, you know how it recontextualizes Before Sunrise, which came before it 9 years. It's one of the best scripts of the decade for sure.
See, this is really interesting. While we both struggled with this category, we have very different nominees. We cross over on one. But this is really fascinating. And the one we do cross over on is Before Sunset.
I figured that would be the one.
Hawk, Delpy, I'm there with you. My other 4 nominees, Charlie and Donald Kaufman for adaptation.
That's a great one.
Peter Jackson and company for The Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Joel and Ethan Coen for No Country for Old Men. And my last one here, which I'm not too, well, maybe I'm a little surprised it didn't land on your list. But I'm going with Steven Spielberg, AI, artificial intelligence.
I had that here initially, but I would love to do more. I would love to go in a time machine and really try to understand what in that script originally came from Stanley Kubrick and how that morphed over the course of 20 years. There's just so much going on with that movie that makes it fascinating. That from I felt better arguing for these other 5 scripts because I could sense the singular vision in those movies from a script writing standpoint more. And that's not a knock on AI. It's just more of it's like that movie is such a head scratch for me when it comes to its script. Like that's something I love about it. I couldn't articulate it, and that's partially why I left it off. And also, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about Steven Spielberg in another category, so it kind of falls into that same Paul Thomas Anderson thing.
Yeah. Well, I will say this: credit whoever you want. I don't care. Credit God. Credit AI. Okay,
not credit AI because AI is not smart enough to write that script.
No way AI could write that script. I don't care who you want to credit. The script is incredible. The writing of that film is masterful. It is a nominee for me here.
Yeah.
With that said, though, and again, like those were always my 5 nominees. As much as I admire the nominees you listed out there as well. I had a really hard time picking a winner here, but at the end of the day, I'm with you. I couldn't escape Before Sunset, Linklater, Hawk, Delpy. Again, those 3 coming together. It is a masterclass in dialogue-driven storytelling. I love the real-time structure to the writing that renders Jesse and Celine in this time together that is almost fleeting in a way, but profoundly moving for the both of them, which gives the film a deep sense of realism, especially as it explores the more mature and complex situations they now find themselves in. Now being in their 30s, Jesse is married with kids. They have their own careers. I love how the film taps into all of that with its ideas of love and time and how this one-time connection they had 9 years ago, it vividly impacts their lives now in the present.
Yeah.
And I think the writing impeccably evokes all of that in these engrossing ways, the introspective conversations they have and how they evolve organically throughout the film. It is miraculous. It's really, really fantastic. And it, like those movies, all 3 of them are kind of a miracle because that's all they are. It's just, it's just the screenplay and the performances by Delpy and Hawk, but the writing and the incessant verbiage that we get, it is a lot, and yet they're nothing short of captivating. And
we often talk about movies feeling so quote unquote written as if it's a negative, but that's what makes these movies so good. These movies are just so written.
Yeah, that's the MVP here.
Yeah.
And it's because they elicit these emotional complexities that say so much about these 2 characters and where they are and how they are defined with each other. And it's great. And you get that great ending that we somewhat alluded to earlier with the song.
Let me sing you a waltz.
It's so good. You're going to miss that playing. Oh, God.
I know. I know.
So yeah, love the screenplay here. It is my winner for best adapted, Before Sunset.
Oh, too many.
All right.
This was hard. This was hard. I really have 7 nominees. I'll just say that.
Fair enough. What do you have as your 5 nominees for best original screenplay?
Once again, I have 7 nominees. Had a hard time picking 5 here, but here are the 5 I have now. Could probably change in like 5 minutes. I have Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson for The Royal Tenenbaums, Cameron Crowe for Almost Famous, Brad Bird for Ratatouille, Charlie Kaufman for Synecdoche, New York, and Edward Yang for Yi Yi. Admittedly, I did have a little bit of a harder time picking a winner here, even though I did say earlier picking winner for these categories was way easier than it was picking the nominees themselves. But I did struggle more picking a winner for original screenplay as opposed to adapted screenplay. In the end, I just said to myself, this is about originality. This is not just about an original script and an original idea, but which one's emphasizing how unique you can be as a storyteller when it comes to what you put on the page and then how that vision comes to life. For me, that comes through the most in Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York, which is why I'm going to give that one the award here. I just think as far as what it means to do something on the page that's never been done before, that's the best example of it. And thankfully, the movie's great, so it's not just doing something unique for the sake of it. It actually has a purpose. And as far as originality is concerned, I think this is the best example of taking a swing, doing something unique, and doing it really well. So that's why I'm picking my winner here as Synecdoche, New York, Charlie Kaufman.
Okay. Yeah, that is a really great nomination there. Great pick. I do love that as well. I have Charlie Kaufman on my list of nominees here as well, but for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I have Sofia Coppola for Lost in Translation, Cameron Crowe, Almost Famous, Alfonso and Carlos Cuarón for Y Tu Mamá También, and Wes Anderson for The Royal Tenenbaums. Okay, so this one was also tricky for me. I will say I do think ultimately it came down to 2. It came down to Charlie Kaufman, and it came down to Wes Anderson.
I figured those would be the 2.
Love The Royal Tenenbaums. We talked about it some weeks ago, and it is one of my favorite films of the decade here. I'm sure we'll talk about it more as we go. I love Wes Anderson as a director in that film. His writing it's the best he's ever done. And I really wanted to go with him here. However, I could not escape Charlie Kaufman. And I know this is maybe playing a little bit of politics with my own nominees here, because I wanted to reward Charlie Kaufman. He had such a phenomenal decade. It somewhat harkens back to what I was saying about Clint Mansell and why I'm ultimately heartbroken I couldn't fit Mansell into a category of 5 as much as I desperately want to. But Kaufman had a fan-freaking-tastic decade. Obviously, I nominated him for adaptation. I've nominated him here for Eternal Sunshine. Synecdoche, New York is one of the best films of the decade, broadly speaking, when you're just simply talking about the best films of the decade. Yeah. So I feel like that was ultimately my tiebreaker. I have to reward him. And
I think that's fair.
I feel like I can do that and not lose sleep as much as I love Wes Anderson. Because Kaufman really deserves it here.
Well, see, it's different when we're talking about a full decade as opposed to 1 year, because then the politics, I feel like, have more of a negative connotation. Because when you do it for a certain year, you really should just be honoring that person for that particular thing. But we're talking about the full decade here. So in this case, Charlie Kaufman had a certain run that it's almost like talking about the cinematographers for our cinematography category. Emmanuel Lubezki, Roger Deakins, all these individuals that just had such killer runs behind. Christopher Doyle, where it was like it was their decade in many ways. So to give these individuals more of an edge because of what came before or after that film you're talking about in particular, I think is kind of fair in this regard. It's the one time I feel like we could be a little bit, we could cheat a little bit, I'll simply say.
Yeah. I completely agree. And the Royal Tenenbaums will get more love from me as we go. So I didn't feel as if I was being
Missing out on that
disingenuous
one.
to that
Yeah.
film. Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I also feel like it's complementary to what you were just saying, because the originality of Eternal Sunshine is remarkable. Like that's
Off
one
the
of
charts,
its
yeah.
best qualities. It's so intuitive with its dualities, and perhaps what's most obvious is the differences between Joel and Clementine, given their personalities. But when you kind of move beyond that and you consider the construct of that film and its central premise, the emotional core and what it's exploring there might not be original, but the vehicle, the cipher, is simply something we've never seen before, especially at that time. I think
Yeah.
since then we've seen many films that are inspired by Eternal Sunshine. But when that film came out, it was so unique, so distinctive, which, par for the course for Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love what that film has to say about love and memories, and how that can be something that builds you up and it makes you whole, but it also has the power to destroy you. Like that duality in that film, I think is quite profound. And I just absolutely love how refreshing it is, how passionate the writing is, and all of that. The characters are so fully realized. The dialogue is inventive. The emotional has incredible depth to it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful movie. And it all starts with Kaufman's screenplay. So that is my winner here for Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah.
The 2000s.
2004, this movie came out. I'll always remember that retrospective as the year you and I almost had the exact same top 10. We had 8 crossovers, and the top 4 was almost exactly the same, just in a different order. So proof we have the same brain.
Yep. And I'll be curious if anything has shifted when we do the reshuffling exercise on the next episode. I'm curious if anything
A little bit has.
there.
A little bit has, I'll say that. But there were a few rewatches. I mean, here's an example. I'm not going to say if it's in my top 10 or not, but you just recently talked about your newly found love for The Village. Like there are a few other films that fall into a similar category of ones that I realize, oh, this is actually great. So, there's something to talk about there for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to Best Director. What do you have as your 5 nominees for Best Director?
This was kind of hard. Okay, so I've got Paul Thomas Anderson for There Will Be Blood, Alfonso Cuarón for Y Tu Mama Tambien, Steven Spielberg for AI, Artificial Intelligence, Wong Kar-wai for In the Mood for Love. The last spot here could really be reserved for a number of individuals, but I guess to split the wealth a little bit further, looking at what's another great technical experience from the decade, I'm going to go with Zhang Yimou for Hero to round out my 5 nominees.
Okay.
While I didn't nominate Spielberg for screenplay for political reasons, as we talked about, he is my winner for AI for Best Director. I think it's I know that might be a controversial pick for a lot of people, just AI in general. We'll talk about
it's good.
We'll
people.
talk about that film
just
more. We'll
it.
talk about that film more. But there's something about the way he handles tone in such an un-Spielbergian way that makes that film so special. It is far and away the bleakest film he's ever made. And a lot of that is also given what Kubrick originally wanted to do with the film, and Spielberg's sensibilities just adding this perfect polarity to that coldness. It makes for such a unique experience in Spielberg's filmography, and he directs it in a way as if like like we always talk about filmmakers that have these pivot points in their careers, like these new turning points where they shift gears and become a completely different filmmaker tonally and emotionally and even thematically. AI kind of feels like that movie for Spielberg in a lot of ways. At least it feels like a rebirth. And while not everything he would do afterwards would follow the tonal trajectory of AI, it definitely set up a different kind of Spielberg, which is why this era is my favorite era from him as a filmmaker. He wasn't always making his best films, but the early to mid 2000s, he was at his most fascinating. He was trying to challenge his own his own ethos in some ways, and did
Yeah.
so in many films outside of just AI. But I think AI is
Mhm.
the best encapsulation of Spielberg becoming a completely new filmmaker
Yeah.
at this time.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and spoil this as well for the next episode. I have dubbed Best Discovery as the Steven Spielberg Award because even though he's obviously not a discovery for the 2000s, he is, though, in a lot of ways, for all of the reasons you're talking about there. It's like he became a completely different director altogether, and I love it. I cherish that Steven Spielberg that came out in the 2000s. For that and all the reasons you mentioned there, he is a nominee for me as well. Alfonso Cuarón, I have him here for Children of Men. I want to quickly take a second here to note his 2000s as well. Obviously, he had a fantastic decade between.
I think
Itu
he was
Mamatamian,
he and Spielberg were the directors of the 2000s.
the directors,
in some way. Yeah,
absolutely. Itu Mamatamian, Children of Men, which you and I have as nominees here for Best Director, respectively. And then there's, of course, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. And earlier, we nominated John Williams for Azkaban. Of course, it was Alfonso Cuarón, especially in that decade, to bring out something new and distinct and incredible out of John Williams for that franchise.
Yeah.
Leave it to Cuarón to do that. Of course, he was the director to pull that off. He had a phenomenal decade. So I quickly wanted to mention that as well. It's funny how that is somewhat played out here in our list of nominees. All right, so I have Spielberg, I have Cuarón, I have Wong Kar-wai for In the Mood for Love. I have Paul Thomas Anderson for There Will Be Blood. My last nominee and my winner for Best Director of the 2000s, simply for the monumental achievement that was The Lord of the Rings.
You know, I almost thought
Peter
about that. Yeah.
Jackson.
I almost
Oh,
thought about that.
My goodness, how he blends epic storytelling with groundbreaking, at least at the time, visual effects and practical stunt work is truly unbelievable. The meticulous attention to detail is simply absurd. The world he creates in those films is so lush and rich. He breathes life into it in ways that is almost hard to articulate. It's simply one of the most immersive theatrical experiences you could have. The scale and depth, the grand sweeping battles, the deeply rich characters he creates, it's stunning. Absolutely stunning. I'm not sure we'll ever see epic fantasy cinema like that ever again. Part of this is absolutely hindsight. When we consider, and we've talked about this a lot in recent weeks and months, blockbuster filmmaking today, it just doesn't have the scope and the grandeur of what we get with something like The Lord of the Rings. And this is a guy that had never done anything like this before. He approached
That's probably what
the
made it
studio
great. That's probably what
and
made
said,
it great
I have
because
this vision.
Yeah, he had a unique vision that hadn't been done before because he didn't have experience doing it, which allowed himself to be even more creative than the average person who may have known how to do something like this.
Would never happen today. Ever.
No.
Ever. Would never happen today.
And you know,
Crazy.
we talked about this when we did our Lord of the Rings series, but one of the things that made the Lord of the Rings films so distinctive and why they were such milestones for blockbuster filmmaking was the fact that they weren't made with the mindset or the agenda to be blockbusters. They were made just to be big, epic movies. They had way more in common tonally with movies like Ben-Hur, the classic era of Hollywood epics, movies like Giant, for instance. I like Peter Jackson is channeling that energy more so than anything else, that he basically created a new type of cinematic experience. He invented something, really. And ever since then, studios have been able to capitalize on that idea by taking its visual flair, but never its thinking. And they've never been able to replicate it ever.
They've never been able to replicate it. Again, it is a monumental achievement of having a vision aesthetically in terms of scope and scale, but also the characters and fully realizing them. And there are a lot of characters here, and every single one of them has an arc that is resonant, that is powerful, that you you attach yourself to in some way, shape, or form, and you couple that with how innovative the practical effects are, the pioneering of certain digital techniques, in particular mocap. You think of Gollum and how that sparked something completely new in Hollywood, how that would take off. I don't know if we'll see anything like it again. It was
We'll see attempts, and we'll see a lot of
it was
failures.
one of a kind. It came at the perfect time for Peter Jackson, and he absolutely freaking delivered. 3 movies that are truly great, and it's really one large movie.
It's
That's
one movie,
ultimately why I'm cheating here with a lot of my Lord of the Rings nominations.
I don't think this is a cheat.
Yeah,
I don't even like calling this a trilogy. I really don't.
It's one huge movie.
Yeah.
And that's certainly how I look at it. That's really how it was made in a lot of ways. And it's incredible. Absolutely incredible. So yeah, Peter Jackson. I mean, and just given how big and how risky, how bold it was to do that, it's phenomenal that he pulled it off.
I want to be that fly in the wall. I want to hear what that pitch was and what those meetings were like to make this happen and give him that permission. I want to hear what that was.
I completely agree. So yes, I had to go with Peter Jackson here. The Lord of the Rings, my winner for best director of the 2000s. All right, let's get to the acting categories. Let's start with best supporting actress. What do you have here?
Yeah, this is one of the easier categories for me. I had 5 or 6. I had a couple names floating around here that pretty much ended up being my nominees here. I have Rosemary Harris for Spider-Man 2, Taraji P. Henson for Hustle and Flow, Kate Hudson for Almost Famous, Frances McDormand for Almost Famous.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Gong Li for Miami Vice.
Nice. Okay.
For the same reasons I gave my award to 3-6 Mafia, Taraji P. Henson wins my award for probably the greatest insert shot, or performative insert shot that I've ever seen in the past like 20 years. But again, that self-realization is one of the things I am just inherently moved by, especially when it comes to music. So like that realization that she actually is talented, that she contributed to something that sounded really good, it's one of the pivotal moments of music making as represented in film and the aftermath of that. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm going with her here.
Yeah, that is a fan-freaking-tastic moment in that film. She's very, very good and a nominee for me as well. The more we go on here, the less guilty I feel about the recognition of blockbuster filmmaking in the 2000s, because I also have Rosemary Harris for Spider-Man 2. I couldn't quite get to Danny Elfman, but I at least found an avenue to get Spider-Man 2 on here because she is so good. I took Sam to see Spider-Man 2. I told this story a few months ago.
I love that for you, man.
When we got to that moment, when she's talking to Peter about what it means to be a hero, I was undone. It was at that moment I realized, yep, she's going to be in my top 5 for best supporting actress of the decade.
That monologue is another reason why I did nominate Alvin Sargent for screenplay, because you basically get the screenwriter for ordinary people to turn Spider-Man into the superhero version of ordinary people. Is basically what he did.
Great. It's really great. So yeah, I had to go with Rosemary Harris as well. I have Kate Blanchett here for I'm Not There, Saoirse Ronan for Atonement, and my 5th nominee here is Gwyneth Paltrow for The Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay.
As much as I love the Almost Famous ladies, and they are my 6 and 7 here, it was a struggle. I really, really wanted to get them in, but math is what it is. And I feel real confident about my 5 there, however.
Yeah.
And my winner is, and again, why I didn't feel guilty about going with Kaufman for screenplay, because I am rewarding the Royal Tenenbaums here. Gwyneth Paltrow is my vote for best supporting actress of the decade. It is a striking portrayal of a character that is complex and so emotionally wounded. And how that comes through in Paltrow's performance, it is incredible. There's a lot of subtlety to her performance, great nuance, her detached demeanor and understated approach to a lot of the interaction she gets, and even the way she delivers dialogue in the film. It is remarkable, the inner turmoil, the sense of alienation that comes through in Margot because of her performance. It's fantastic. But there's also a tinge of, maybe not even a tinge, a fair amount of eccentricity to it as well that denotes, oh yeah, she's in the Tenenbaum family, because all of these characters are weird. They all have their weird quirks because it's a Wes Anderson film, of course. And I think she balances all of that very, very well. And I love it. There's a lot of richness to Margot in the film that we talked about quite extensively when we reviewed it here on the show, if anyone wants to go and check that out. But yeah, Paltrow and how she delivers that here, I think is really great. There are moments from this film when you simply utter the words "the Royal Tenenbaums." I immediately think of Paltrow. I immediately think of a few choices she makes as a performer that makes her performance and thus the character distinctive and so memorable. And I love it. And she chews on that Anderson dialogue with meticulous precision. It's so good.
Arguably the best ensemble film of the entire decade.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
certainly up there.
Yeah, because I feel like you could say that about any performance here, and some of them we may talk about in just a little bit. I almost had Gwyneth Paltrow here, but I do have a few others from the Royal Tenenbaums nominated, so I at least had some representation that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But it's certainly one of the best performed, one of the best collectively performed films of this entire decade, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just love the emotional depths of that character, and the way Paltrow taps into that is just brilliant, I think. So yeah, my vote for best supporting actress of the decade. All right, let's get to best actor in a supporting role. What do you have here, Brendan?
This is one I kind of want to cheat on this one. And let's see what you think about this. I wouldn't be surprised if you weirdly allow what I'm about to do here. But if you don't, I'll go ahead and pick a rightful winner, or at least a winner that I think would be worthy of this award. But I do have 5 nominees. I'll get to my 5th nominee with a bit of an asterisk here. My nominees include Casey Affleck for the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Yeah, good one.
David Carradine for Kill Bill Volume 2.
Okay.
Brian Cox for 25th Hour. Luke Wilson for the Royal Tenenbaums. And my 5th nominee and my winner, Philip Seymour Hoffman for Everything.
I mean, okay.
I kind of
I feel like you should pick one, because it's a little different than, let's say, a trilogy of films like Lord of the Rings before or whatever. But at the same time, I do understand. And when you invoke the name Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's really hard for me to push back, because of course I want to recognize and celebrate that man. I absolutely do.
It's not even just that; it's recognizing and celebrating his even his brief appearances in movies as this character actor of sorts. It's really a way of using this category to celebrate the man. I will say this as a definitive. I think this is what we should do. And we see this at the Oscars, and our show doesn't always align with the Oscars, but I think we can take the ethos of the Oscars for this specific instance, where often we see an actor nominated for one film, but we know that it's because he had a great year for their work,
the work of that year. So I think if you want to include, like for the sake of the nomination, throw out one of those performances.
Okay.
But we'll talk about him as a body of work.
Yeah, and specifically with regard to his supporting performances from this decade, because there's a few leading performances we can also talk about in a very different way, but I'm focusing on when he makes appearances in, let's say, State and Maine, or as the villain in Mission Impossible 3. He just overtakes those respective movies.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one movie just for the sake of this nomination, I'm going to pick Along Came Polly. I'm
it.
dead serious. I'm dead
I
serious.
love it. No, I'm not pushing back. I love it.
But in a way, I think that in a pretty bad movie, but I think his performance in that movie is the best representation of how he would come into a movie for even a brief moment, an inconsequential role sometimes, and completely overtake the movie. But I think his performance in Along Came Polly is the best example of how he did similar things in Punch Drunk Love or State and Maine or Almost Famous or Doubt. All very different types of performances, but he took them over. He took the movies over. And I think Along Came Polly is certainly the loudest example of that. But I think maybe the quintessential example of that.
So
and,
good.
you know, rest in peace to one of the absolute greatest actors to have ever lived.
I miss him dearly every single time I see him on screen. Regardless of what I'm watching, I immediately choke up before settling into the movie and his performance. He was one of the best, one of my very favorites.
Yeah.
Do miss him. So yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. As far as my nominees for Best Actor in a Supporting Role, I have Sean Astin for Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Heath Ledger for The Dark Knight. Luke Wilson for The Royal Tenenbaums. I'm completely there with you.
Okay.
Christoph Waltz for Inglourious Bastards. And my fifth nominee here is Javier Bardem for No Country for Old Men. And that is my winner, Javier Bardem. Oh my God. One of the most terrifying performances of all time. It is a masterclass in chilling, understated menace. Anton Chigurh is unsettling in everything he does, but there's a fascinating philosophical intensity to him that Bardem taps into with this incredible vigor. He's cold and calculated, yet there's also this disturbing sense of unpredictability to him as well. I love that in Bardem's performance.
Yeah.
He gives the film a harrowing atmosphere, this existential dread that is unrelenting. The tension throughout is palpable because of Bardem's performance. Part of it is the Coen's writing and direction for sure, but I think more than anything, it is Bardem and what he brings to that film in terms of the harrowing presence that he brings to that character. It is truly, truly astonishing stuff. And honestly, I don't even know if it was close for me. As much as I love these other four nominees, I feel like this was always going to be my winner. You could replace the other four because there are some other great great other performances that could be interchangeable. But Bardem was never leaving. That was always going to be my winner. Here it is.
And funny enough, I didn't even nominate him.
No, you didn't. I don't know why. He is a force to be reckoned with in that film. But
he's
I also
great in the movie.
Even beyond the tone of the character, what he brings there, or even the physicality that he brings to it. And again, that sense of tension. What the character means to the film on a thematic level, I think is also fascinating. And he's a big part of that. Like he's
a walking symbol in many ways.
He's a walking symbol. And I think it is part of the brilliance of that film. Bardem makes choices throughout the film that is very aware of that. And I love that in his performance as well. It's just everything about that film is so meticulous, including his performance. But that's what makes Anton Chigurh simply an all-time villain character.
Oh, he absolutely is. And I think if there's anything that maybe kept him off my list of five here, it's when I look at a movie like No Country for Old Men, he actually doesn't even give my favorite performance in the movie. It's actually Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee Jones, he's great as well.
Yeah, like if I were to extend this out to maybe go for a 6 or 7 here, I may have actually included Tommy Lee Jones from this movie.
Yeah.
But again, like, is he? By the time it reaches its climax, you might even be able to argue he's kind of a lead in some ways, at least like given the way that
like that final sequence.
That final scene in a way turns Tommy Lee Jones into the star of the movie. There's a bit of a gray area there, whereas Javier Bardem is clearly giving a supporting performance in that movie. It's clear as day, and it's consistent throughout.
Yeah. I will say, not to get too much into it at this moment, but I do think both of those performances are reliant on each other for the film as a whole. Individually, great performances. The film, I think, works because of how the two are so tethered to each other.
Mhm.
It's great stuff. But yeah,
It's great.
Bardem,
It's great.
just absolutely phenomenal stuff here. So
Is he the inspiration for you having a coin in front of you when you couldn't pick a winner?
No, that's all because I needed a way to determine a winner.
Oh,
So
I
went
was
to a
just
coin.
gonna say because what's the most you're gonna lose on a coin toss? I was making that reference
Oh,
there.
gotcha. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, he some of his stuff in that film is also, and I can't recall if we mentioned it as far as honorable mentions go. They absolutely would be, but
Mhm.
some of the scenes of him in that film are scenes of the decade stuff as well. Like just truly
I love the
haunting
way the
stuff.
Coens film it because if you've actually tried reading Cormac McCarthy's source material, it's almost verbatim the movie because he originally wrote that story as a script. So the Coens actually didn't have to do much adapting, which in a way is what makes it such a great adaptation. Is their restraint and their reliant on the greatness of that source material and just how they chose to visualize it. It's really fascinating in that regard.
Yeah, good stuff. Absolutely love it. Let's get to Best Actress. What do you have here for Best Actress?
I've got Bjork for Dancer in the Dark, Maggie Chung for In the Mood for Love, Julie Delpy for Before Sunset, Koryanka Kilcher for The New World, and Maribel Verdú for Y Tu Mama Tambien. I think we're going to cross over on quite a few of those, actually. And I talked about this during episode 598 when we did our best scenes of the decade, how that particular moment, that phone call scene from Y Tu Mama Tambien was one of my favorite moments of performance from the entire decade, which is why Maribel
Yeah.
Verdú is my winner here.
Yeah, good stuff.
It's such a great example of how a performance can rightfully and not in a ham-fisted way recontextualize the entire movie that you just watched. Because what we see at the end involving Luisa, in any other filmmaker's hands, in any other performer's hands, less experienced performer, that would feel like a cheap twist ending. And it never does. It makes you look back on what that performance was doing in the hidden layers of it. And your heart just breaks. I hate to
Yeah, it's
use that
devastating.
cheap analogy, but I can't think of any other way to put it. It's one of my favorite performances I've ever seen in a movie. I'm willing to go that far. I think it's that great.
It's really great. I'm there with you. And you're right. We are going to have some crossover here. In fact, I believe we cross over on 4 of these 5.
Wow.
Because I also have Maribel Verdú. I also have Maggie Chung. I also have Koryanka Kilcher from The New World. I have Bjork from Dancer in the Dark. Our only disparity here, my 5th nominee is Michelle Williams for Wendy and Lucy.
I almost nominated her. I had her in my list of backups here.
Would have been hilarious if we crossed over.
Imagine
on all 5,
one of the most out of the box films that we could think of. One of these smaller films that no one might even thought of. And we cross over on all of them. That would have been hilarious.
Would have been hilarious. But yeah, those are my 5. My winner here, as much as I love Verdú for all of those reasons, really, I love all 5 of these, but I am going to go with Maggie Chung in The Mood for Love. One of the most heartbreaking, yet beautiful performances you'll ever see. She gives Su Li Zhen a delicate gracefulness that is so profoundly stirring, given the heartbreak that character experiences. That's a result of her husband leaving her. And as she grapples with this new reality, Chung's nuanced expressions and these understated gestures convey an emotional complexity that's intense, yet subtle and evocative. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, rather, when we did best scenes of the decade, I talked about the last role play scene. That was one of my 5. And there's a moment where Chow Mo-wan walks away to leave for good. And there's a moment where the camera lingers on Chung as she deeply teeters between going after him or sticking with her convictions as it relates to her husband. And it is truly astonishing work. Like, you see the back and forth so vividly there in that moment. And that's simply one example, but the whole film, I also think of the catharsis when they're trying to role play another moment and she simply succumbs to her emotions there. It's absolutely fantastic. I just absolutely love what she brings to this role. It complements, the film's tone and its evocative approach to this story. It's great. It's nothing short of sublime. My winner for Best Actress of the 2000s.
Probably would have been my number 2 or number 3. It was between Maribel Verdú, Bjork, and Maggie Cheung. Those were the 3 I immediately thought of for this category.
For sure. Yep, completely there with you. All right, let's get to Best Actor. This will be our last category before we get to our Best Picture category, if you will.
Quote unquote
our
Best
top
Picture.
10.
Yep.
All right, Best Actor. What do you got?
All right, we'll definitely have some crossover here as well, I'm sure. But I have Daniel Day-Lewis for There Will Be Blood, Gene Hackman for The Royal Tenenbaums, Haley Joel Osment for AI, Artificial Intelligence, Adam Sandler for Punch Drunk Love. And this was sort of an out of the box pick I picked at the last minute, but I think we can argue that our biggest and best movie star of the 2000s may have been Denzel Washington. So I decided to pick one of his performances, and recently I gave Man on Fire a revisit, and his performance in that movie is so strong because it's basically filling in every gap that the script doesn't offer you. Like, that movie is so profoundly moving, and there's nothing about the film's story or even the film itself that tells you why you're supposed to feel the way you do. It's all in Denzel's performance. It almost feels like a silent movie in some ways, but I think it's that good. He's not my winner, even though I wanted to justify including a bit of an out-of-the-box pick like that, but I think he's fantastic in the film. My winner is actually Haley Joel Osment for AI, Artificial Intelligence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's one of the best child performances, honestly, ever. And it's certainly no surprise coming from Spielberg, who just knows how to direct children. But I think it's the most challenging role of these 5. Which is why I'm giving Haley Joel Osment the win. He was up, like, his back was against the wall with this kind of character and this kind of performance. It is so hard and so challenging, and somehow he makes it work and adds so many different layers that we are continuing to uncover these days. So for all those reasons, we may talk about the film a little bit further as this list goes on, but I think he's really wonderful in this movie, and I think gives an all-time performance.
Haley Joel Osment is so good in that film that he essentially quit acting afterwards. Like,
he can't live up to it. I
will never be better than this. I'm out. Legendary move. Absolutely legendary. I'm with you. Haley Joel Osment, AI, Artificial Intelligence. It is a nominee for me as well. You and I also agree on Gene Hackman for The Royal Tenenbaums and Daniel Day-Lewis for There Will Be Blood. My other 2 nominees here are Tony Leung for In the Mood for Love. And my last nominee, I had to also recognize him. I'm with you, Brendan. I understand the plight. Philip Seymour Hoffman, Synecdoche, New York, is my 5th nominee.
Okay, almost thought of that too.
I hate to be conventional here. This is a bit of a trite pick, as most see this as the best performance of the decade, but I am going with Daniel Day-Lewis for There Will Be Blood. I will say, though, I'm not sure I would have picked him if we did this, let's say, 5-6 years ago. I think doing this now completely recontextualizes how I view that film. And I think it all comes down to how Daniel Plainview is seen as this ruthless figure who will stop at nothing to be successful, even if that means corrupting himself to greed and moral decay. However, that is only half the picture. I think what is so often missed when talking about that film and Plainview, what makes the character so striking is that he's actually a loving father first. It's not until the tragedy of his son where he realizes that his emotions as a father will trump his business ambitions. So he sends his son away. That's when he transforms into the Daniel Plainview that is often talked about, into this unsettling monster that towers over everyone around him. That duality in Daniel Day-Lewis's performance is stunning. The first time around, I certainly did not catch that when I watched this for the first time in 2007. But I was also in college, far from being a parent, of course. And you do grab on to the ruthlessness of the character. You know, I drink your milkshake. That's so iconic now, right?
Yeah.
Like you grab onto that. On the other side of parenthood and maturing into adulthood, that's not the moment for me. Like the ending of this film is gripping, don't get me wrong, but I much prefer, or if that's the wrong word, I love Daniel Day-Lewis when he reacts to the son of his tragedy. Like that's the moment in the film for me.
For sure.
Or even just adopting him with what we see at the beginning of the film in that wordless 20 minutes and how he reacts there. Like there's so much about Plainview as a loving father that is in that performance that I think is just as important, that's just as good and necessary for that film and where it ultimately goes. So that's where I come around on Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood. It is that duality that makes it what it is, that makes it so powerful. So he is my winner here for Best Actor.
What I think is so complex about the movie is that in any simpler actor or filmmaker's hands, Daniel Plainview would have started this journey as just a loving father and a good man, and then end as this monstrous figure that we see. Throughout most of the movie, he still kind of has that sinister quality in some way.
It's
Even
bubbling there for sure.
Yeah, it is. Like you sense it. He's not. You kind of sense this seedy, selfish, monstrous man that's about to surface. In many ways, this movie kind of functions as like a villain origin story in some ways, but still maintaining some of those secretive qualities that make him potentially a good person if he were to act on those right impulses, which he doesn't do. So I love the way that the film toys that line. And the making of this movie, there was so much about the formation of Daniel Plainview as a character that actually came from Day-Lewis himself. There was a lot of back and forth between Day-Lewis and Anderson, where as Anderson was writing the movie, Day-Lewis would just simply ask him questions saying, what if I do this with the character? So there, in some ways, Daniel Day-Lewis is so good of an actor, he basically directed himself. And so like you kind of have to give him an award for just that. That's what makes a good performance like this. He doesn't even need a great director. And Paul Thomas Anderson has even said the fact that Day-Lewis will stay in character all the time. You have like your own living, breathing character to just film. And you don't have to tell them to do anything.
Yeah, and that's another part of it too. Yeah. Like it's the mechanics of the performance. The way he chews on dialogue, the vocal dialect, like all of that is also fascinating. That plays a part of it as well. But
I forget where I heard this. It was on some podcast, and someone was talking about how they knew someone that worked on There'll Be Blood and got to interact with Daniel Day-Lewis. And of course, as an actor, when you go in between takes and you go to makeup and all those things, you have your own trailer, you have your own place to go. That when the takes were done and he had to leave to go to his trailer, he never said like, oh, I'm going to leave to go to my trailer now. He'd just go, oh, I'm going to go now. He would actually... I love that.
Honestly, I would love that. It's like play camp. Like everyone's in character all the time. It's like, going to a giant convention and everyone's dressed up in character. Like, I don't know.
He must find that so amusing. He must have a good time with that.
Absolutely. Do love that about him and the performances. He's really great. I love him in that film. So, Daniel Day-Lewis, There Will Be Blood, my winner for Best Actor. All right, as we transition to Best Picture, aka our top 10 movies of the decade, just want to reiterate one more time, we will have a follow-up episode to this one talking about our unique categories, our individual awards: Best Discovery, Best Surprise Actor or Actress, Best Surprise Movie, Best Overlooked Movie, Best Opening or Closing Credit Sequence or Scene. Stay tuned for that. That is going to be the follow-up bonus episode to this. And Brendan and I will also talk about our top 10 movies for each of the 10 years and how they've reshuffled since we did them originally. So stay tuned for that. All right. With that said, Brendan, it is time for our top 10 movies of the decade. All right, Brendan, we need to talk about coffee.
Medicine, adult medicine right there.
Absolutely. You need it. I need it. And look, we're transitioning into the fall, and that means the weather is going to change soon, at least for most states. I live in Florida where it is summer all the time.
I literally experienced that myself, JD, just given the fact that I came back from vacation in North Carolina, coming back to Pennsylvania. It already looks like fall. The leaves are falling. The leaves are gone. So I totally understand that, but it made me crave certain kinds of coffee flavors and aromas that just fit the autumn vibe.
It just hits differently in the fall season. It just does. And you want the best coffee that money can buy. That's why we love Coffee Cult. They source specialty grade coffee from all over the world, and it is the best of the best. They have these meticulous processes that take the green coffee that normally comes a specialty grade, and they go the extra mile to make sure that every bean they roast is up to par in terms of quality. So that combined with the actual roasting profiles, and it's just the best coffee. So you don't need to put a lot of stuff in it. This coffee is meant to be taken in its purest form. And so when you taste these coffees, you get these natural, incredible flavors of, chocolate and oats, or if it's a fruit forward coffee, you get these high end notes of strawberries and blueberries. It's just really, really incredible stuff.
That just sounds so fall to me. It sounds so autumn there.
It hits different in the fall. So you have to take advantage while you can. Go to coffeecult.com, get your coffee, use our code ISF24. Again, that code is ISF24, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that code is ISF24. That's Coffee Cult, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. And we thank them for their support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about t-shirts and swag.
Gear,
and
toys, with our logo tattooed right on them.
And, one thing that you can do is order your Coffee Cult, and you can get it in an InSession Film mug, because we have those available.
We have those. Yeah.
And it comes in all kinds of varieties. If you go to our website, InSessionFilm.com, or you can go to TeePublic, that's where we have our store directly, teepublic.com/store/InSessionFilm. You can see all of our designs up there, and you can get t-shirts, mugs, pins, all kinds of fun things. I imagine most of you will get mugs and t-shirts, which is perfectly understandable.
For sure.
We have a bunch of great stuff up there. Like award season is coming around the corner soon. We have some award season themed shirts up there.
The Moonlight one is still my favorite.
A couple of weeks ago last weekend rather, we did our 2000 retrospective, and we had an idea blossom out of that as it relates to Almost Famous. And that's something I am working on. So hopefully we'll have a new Almost Famous themed shirt
I can't wait
available
to see
in the store soon. Maybe we'll have a Best of the Decade shirt. Who knows? But there's all kinds of fun things out there with our logos on them, our designs. It's everything that's up there we design ourselves. So go check it out. It really helps out the show. You'll look great if it's a t-shirt, or you can get a really cool mug and support us in that way as well. So again, go to teepublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm, or just go to InSessionFilm.com/store on our website, and you'll see a bunch of stuff there that you can go and check out. And for those that do that, we can't thank you enough.
Absolutely.
It really means a lot. It helps us do this from week to week, and we hope that you do enjoy that. So again, go check out that store, and we thank everybody for their support. All right.
Yeah. How much crossover are we going to have? We always like to play this game every single time we do a retrospective for one of these years. And for context, for those who might be listening or watching for the very first time, on average, JD and I usually cross over maybe like about around 5 films out of the 10, something like that. There have been times it's more. One year it was 8, and then maybe other times it could be as low as 4 or 3. But I'd say around 5 or 6 is pretty much the average. Do you think it'll be that once again? I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be close to that.
I think so. I think it'll come close to our average. I think that we'll have at least three, minimum of three. I could see up to 5 or 6, but I think we'll have at least 3.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
My biggest question, and I thought about this actually before we hopped on to record here, because you often find yourself, like Brendan specifically, when we come into these kinds of episodes, he always has these surprises, whether it be a first time watch or a revisit. What I think Brendan would have in his top 10, he always throws in a curveball or two. And while I could sit here and try to predict your 10 and feel comfortable about it, I know that ultimately, as we go here, that's going to be mute, because surely there's something that has completely undermined what my thought process was. And that's what I look forward to. I feel like I'm much more predictable at this than Brendan is, but we'll see.
I'm looking at my list. I think for anyone listening who doesn't know me like you know me, JD, I think there will be some surprises. But I think given how much you know me, I don't think these films in my top 10 will necessarily surprise you. You might think, oh, I'm surprised you had it that high, but I don't think it'll go much beyond that level of whoa, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And like I'm mostly thinking about perhaps these curveballs that I simply did not see coming. However, because we've talked about these films already on this episode, we've done the retrospectives, I know which films resonate the most with you, but which one on a revisit, or somehow it came to you and all of a sudden The Prisoner of Azkaban is number 3 on your list. Like, I don't know.
It's not going to be anything like, oh, remember that movie, The Proposition? That's in my top 10. It's not going to be anything like that.
I don't think it'll be anything like that, but I am expecting a curveball to it. Let me just put it that way.
All right, well, let's see. I think my number 10 will be a curveball to many people listening who might think, oh, for all the kind of movies that you talked about just now in your awards side of things, you have that in your top 10? Wow, that's kind of surprising. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't think you'll react that way, but I think other people might.
Okay. All right. Before we do quickly, as we do always with these retrospectives, the decade of the 2000s. Do you have any broad thoughts on the decade, how it ended up playing out?
Well, I will say I'm going to have a soft spot for this decade no matter what. And this is something we talked about quite a bit to open up this entire episode, was that a lot of us, you, myself, many of our colleagues in the world of hashtag film Twitter, which we still call it that, no matter what Elon Musk wants to say, we grew up with a lot of these movies. We came of age with a lot of these movies. So I'll say it once again, my top 20 here, actually, maybe even looking at this list now, like my top 21 or 22, these might find themselves in my top 100 of all time if I were to do that full exercise, which means it's entirely possible that the 2000s might be the most represented decade if I were to do a top 100 list like that. And it's because this is where I really started to understand my love of film. And even when I go back and watch some of these movies for either the first time or with a new lens, I still have that nostalgia and that history with relation to that. So I think that's why I'm always going to see this decade as a really high point for cinema. And I think for a lot of other reasons outside of just that level of nostalgia, I think this was a great decade. Some years certainly better than others. We just got done talking about the year 2000, and we both didn't love that particular year when compared to, let's say, 2007 or 2004 or 2001, which are certainly more representative of the best films from this whole decade here. But I think this decade will certainly represent us as as children growing up in many ways. So
Yeah.
I love this decade for that reason.
I agree. I thought it was a phenomenal decade. And what I've really loved about doing these retrospectives and this particular exercise of best of the decade is that we already knew that 2007 was one of the best years for film. That holds up gloriously.
Yeah.
The biggest revelation in all of this to me is that 2004, yes, but maybe more underratedly, 2001, at least for us here in the United States, is one of the best years for cinema, hands down. Full stop.
It's
Period.
really good. It's really good.
It is incredible the depth and the high end quality that year has. I think it should absolutely be in the conversation as much as 2007 is. I did not anticipate that going into that year or into this exercise for the 2000s. I would not have guessed that if you asked me to back in 2015 when we first started getting into this particular decade. But that is an elite year for cinema. Absolutely elite year.
So good. So good.
2005 stands out to me as an amazing year for foreign cinema. When you consider films like Nobody Knows, Old Boy, Cachet, 2046, Memories of Murder. Like there's a lot of really great films, foreign cinema rather, that year. And as we've been talking about, I have really come to love the 2000s as the decade of the blockbuster.
That's another
Lord of the
thing. I knew you were going to
Rings,
talk about that, but I agree with you there.
Pirates of the Caribbean, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, the Dark Knight films, the Ocean's trilogy, Pixar, if you want to consider that blockbuster.
Sure, I would. Yeah,
absolutely. The run they had there. Transformers and Star Wars, if that's your jam. Transformers is for me. And, you know, we had that great conversation with Brandon Streisand earlier in the year, reflecting on the Transformers films of the 2000s. And, you know, it's Michael Bay. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but again, I think compared to a lot of what we get today, those films just stand on a higher pedestal, flaws and all. Then you get these grand spectacles that sit alone, such as Master and Commander, that I think is very good. You know, there's the Mission Impossible movies as well. Like, it is a phenomenal year for the blockbuster that I think holds just as much weight as your artistic films, your indie films that came out during the decade as well.
I agree. It's when filmmakers can make big budget movies and still make, you know, their own movies. It's when Gore Verbinski can still make a Gore Verbinski movie that just happened to be a Pirates of the Caribbean blockbuster, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love those Pirates movies. That trilogy is so good.
These filmmakers were still making movies. They were never working for, you know, like a corporate system. They were never making content. I think both of our lists, both of our respective top 10s will have a mix of that. We'll have, you know, the artful foreign films combined with the big scale blockbusters as well. There was no disassociating them. They both came from the same cloth somehow, and I love that. I absolutely love that.
Okay, with all of that laid out, let's go ahead and jump in. Then, Brendan, what do you have at number 10 for best of the 2000s?
My number 10 is Spider-Man 2.
Okay, all righty. We're already jumping right into it. I figured, given some tweets last night as we are recording this, if that would be the case. I'm curious then, because I don't think it was your number 1 or number 2 originally, if I'm remembering
from 2004.
correctly. For 2004. So has it, and I guess spoiler alert for tomorrow's show, but has that now jumped into that number 1 spot or that number 2 spot?
No, it has not.
It has not.
There's another film from 2004 on my list, and I'm sure if you look at what movies came out in 2004, I'm sure you can guess what other movie I have above it then.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think I may have had it at number 2 or number 3 when we did that retrospective.
I had it at 4 originally.
Okay.
We'll see if that changes tomorrow, but as of that was where I had it originally. It was number 4.
Okay. Well, this is a perfect segue from that conversation we were just having about blockbuster films still feeling like artful experiences. And thinking about Spider-Man 2 again this is something we've always talked about the film, you and I specifically, is that you take away the Spider-Man stuff, you still have a very interesting movie. Because underneath, this is actually one of the better romance films of the decade. I think it is genuinely that good. It's lit and shot in a way that almost feels like a classic Douglas Sirk Technicolor romance film. I think of movies like All That Heaven Allows as an example. It just has a similar vibe to that. And the way it deals with the burden of responsibility from a child's perspective, well, a child being someone attending college. So that particular kind of aspect, there's a weird coming of age aspect to it as well. The film has a lot of layers that Sam Raimi was allowed to explore, and he turned this into a legitimate movie. I just think it's that good for all those reasons. There's actually a bit of a theme with my numbers 10, 9, and 8. All these movies have interesting ways of exploring romance. And that was definitely something we saw a lot in the decade. Very particular kind of romance films. And I actually think Spider-Man 2 is in many ways a romance film. So for a lot of those reasons, there's a heart to this movie that I'm always suffocated by. And I think it is one of the best, if not the best example of what blockbuster filmmaking was and what it still should be and what we miss. I think it is that good.
Yeah, it is a great movie. I absolutely adore it for all those reasons. This will sound, again, I have to emphasize, we are talking about a decade's worth of movies. So the numbers that will be thrown out here might seem a little too high or too low, depending on your perspective.
Oh, this could change
when
tomorrow.
You're considering thousands of movies. I mean, to have it even in your top 60 or top 100 is, it says something about the quality of that movie. I say that to say that Spider-Man 2 currently sits at 25 for me.
Okay.
But I love it. I absolutely adore it. Like I said, originally it sat at number 4 on my list. We'll see if that changes, but I do really love it. I completely agree. One of the best blockbuster movies of the last 40 years. Sam Raimi through and through. Love the romance. Completely agree with everything you had to say there. All right. My number 10, I'm going to the world of Alfonso Cuarón. It is Y Tu Mamá También.
Okay.
Writing of this film is fantastic, as we noted earlier in the show. He was nominated for an Oscar for it, as he should have been.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about the writing is how it immaculately complements his direction and writing. The camera work in the film is maybe a little underrated. Because
I agree.
Yeah, you think about the performances, you think about the writing, but it is a Cuarón movie after all. There are long takes here, and they are terrific. They're really, really great. At the 30-minute mark, as they're driving and talking about their manifesto, there's like a 7-minute one take shot that's just still camera, and
you don't
fantastic.
realize it's one take though. It's not like in Children of Men where and this is not a knock on Children of Men, because that's a very flashy movie and it's meant to be. So the one takes there are very much calling attention to themselves.
Yeah.
But Y Tu Mamá También, those takes go on for as long as they do, like you're saying, but you don't really notice it.
Yeah.
And it's very cryptic in that regard. And I think sometimes those are the best one takes because they immerse you in a way. You don't even realize how long of a journey it's taking you on.
Yeah, it's really lovely in that regard. I love the camera work. The editing is just as great. We somewhat talked about the performances earlier. Maribel Verdú, a nomination for the both of us. You had her as a win for Best Actress. She is truly mesmerizing in that film. Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna are incredibly charming as well. Love how they evoke youthful ignorance impeccably, and the distinctive characteristics of those two characters. They share a bond, but there's so much about the two of them that's very different as well. And just what the film has to say about youthful vigor and ignorance, and the conflict that comes about in the film between Tinoch and Julio. Within all of that, I just think is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, the context of what we learn about Luisa and what she was experiencing, why she chose to go on this trip with Tinoch and Julio. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. It has, like those final 30 minutes is Quran at his very best. And it's incredible. It was my favorite film of 2002. Spoiler alert, it still is my favorite film of 2002. I love it. It is my number 10 here.
It was my number 2 when we did our 2002 retrospective. It was just behind Punch Drunk Love. That's no longer the case. It is now my number 1 film from that year, and all I'll say is this. No other comments.
No other comments. Okay. Foreshadowing. All right, let's get to number 9. Then what do you have as your number 9 film of the decade?
Yeah, so for my number 10, I talked about a film from 2004, that film being Spider-Man 2. My number 9 is also from 2004. And based on your guesstimate, JD, I'm sure you can probably assume what that film is. My number 9 is Before Sunset, the Richard Linklater film. And
Okay.
I have a weird hunch this is probably in your list as well. So maybe I'll keep this one pretty brief, but I gave this film the win for best adapted screenplay for a reason, because it is just so well written. It is just such a written movie. It's one that you have to study. But I love the way it looks back on a previous film and actually changes the way you feel about it. That first film I love as a movie about 20-somethings, but it kind of talks about the annoying qualities of being in your 20s. And this is a film that actually turns that into a plot point and gives it even more purpose. It weirdly makes the first film even better. And to this day, I think the first film is still my favorite of the 3 because it's the one I can rewatch the most. But Before Sunset is absolutely the most important film in this trilogy. It's the one that gives it its thematic arc from beginning to end. So it's in many ways it is the best film in this trilogy because of how it's looking back on something that happened a long time ago and talking about this idea that we all deal with ourselves, being how have we changed and how are we now actually different people, even if we're still longing for the same things we may have longed for back in the day. I think the way it deals with longing in that regard is really quite profound. So really great stuff. I love this movie. I love this trilogy. Even my wife loves this trilogy, so I like rewatching them with her. So it's great stuff. My number 9, Before Sunset.
Yep. I'll just go ahead and reveal this. It is my number 6 film of the decade. So it is also in my top 10. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add in addition to what we said earlier. I had it not just nominated, but like you, it was my vote for best adapted screenplay for all the reasons we talked about earlier. The way it explores the more mature and complex situations of Jesse and Celine, where they find themselves, how that, as you were talking about, adds these layers to the events of Before Sunrise, which is great on its own terms. I just love how this film adds this maturity. There's a lot more to this film that delves into like sex and like these more adult themes that wasn't quite as prominent in Before Sunrise. I love the intimacy of this
there was
film.
there was more of a lustfulness in Before Sunrise, and Before Sunset is about dissecting that lustfulness into something else. Yeah.
Exactly. And how it influences these two characters and how you might even feel about them, because Jesse, as we find out, is married with kids.
Yeah.
But he's not really committed to it. I talked about this for Scenes of the Decade. When they were having that conversation in the cab, we find out that on his wedding day, Jesse wasn't even thinking about his wife. He was thinking about Celine, which is a wild revelation in that film to offer that.
That is gross. Like, that's kind of gross.
It is kind of
very
gross.
icky.
But Celine reacts to it as if like as a compliment to her. And given with where this film ends up, she is very much adding on to the promiscuous nature that comes with Jesse and that revelation, right? Like she's you're gonna miss the plane, you're staying home with me, we're doing this. And he's of course not stopping himself either. So like but given much of the dialogue and what they're talking about, I mean, there is a void in both of them. There is an emptiness. So you understand, you might not agree.
Mm-hmm.
It is morally ambiguous at best, but you at least understand why they make those choices. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great movie for all those reasons. I don't think we need to spend more time on it, but I do want to backtrack a little bit because I didn't really expect us to do the similar to do this similar
And
thing.
we
Where
don't
had
have
some
to. We don't have
Well,
to.
no,
I just figured
honestly, I think
I'd
we're
talk
going
about it.
long enough. We probably should do that. So I might backtrack a little bit and say, okay, Y Tu Mama Tambien. Let's go back to that one for just a moment. You had it at number 10. I said no comment because obviously that alludes to me talking about it a little bit later. I have it
Sure.
at number 3. So
Okay, there you go.
yeah, I'll
Number
just go ahead and
3.
say I have it. Yeah. One thing I do want to add to that film before we get to, I guess we're at your number 9 then, since we just got to Before
Yeah.
Sunset, my number 9. But I do at least want to add something to Y Tu Mama Tambien and how Alfonso Cuarón decides to depict this as not just a coming of age tale for lost innocence, but the way that Mexico itself as a nation was coming of age, the way that the ruling party was going through a transition, and how that led to this rebellious spirit of both Julio and Tenoch. And in the end, they ended up becoming the very thing that they were rebelling against, and how that then juxtaposes the
Yeah.
experience of Luisa, I think, is really quite profound. So all I'll just say is Y Tu Mama Tambien is a film I like more and more as time goes on. I think it's one of the best coming of age films ever made because it tells it in different ways and different layers. So I feel like just to keep the time, as brief
Fair
as
enough.
possible,
Yeah, that's fair.
let's keep moving
Okay.
here. I do love Y Tu Mama Tambien. That is my number 3. So I have it
Okay,
pretty
so
high
you're
up.
number 3.
Yeah.
My number 10.
Mm-hmm.
All right. My number 9, we're going back to the world of Paul Thomas Anderson. There Will Be Blood is my number 9 film of the decade. I don't know if I would
Okay.
have expected that.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that
even
one, actually.
when we did that retrospective, but again, I've really turned a corner on this film, given what I said earlier about Daniel Day-Lewis's performance and really the film at large. That duality in the character is really fascinating. I've always been a fan of There Will Be Blood. I don't know if I
Yeah.
ever really liked it as much as everyone else seemed to, especially when it came out. And even at the end of the decade, it was on a lot of lists for best of the decade. Then I was never that high on it. I think I had it at number 4 originally on my list when we did that retrospective for 2007. So I was high on it.
Yeah.
Maybe
It is the year
not-
2007. Any film that makes it to
Yeah.
number 4 and number 5 means it's one of the greatest
it's
movies
really
ever
great.
made, right?
Yeah, so I was already a big fan of it. I just couldn't quite get it to number 1. There were a few things that held it back for me. And look, I still don't wholly love Paul Dano's performance. That is still something I have to wrestle with. But I think everything else around it is so good. And what really did it for me was, again, that duality and revisiting this film on the other side of being a parent. That just completely struck a new chord with me that I didn't really experience or resonate with before. And I absolutely love that. Like that moment of him going after his son when the rig explodes, it guts me. It absolutely guts me. Like, you're safe now. Like when he says you're safe now,
Yeah.
it is incredibly heart-wrenching. And I love that. And how that ultimately bursts a new Daniel Plainview, because he knows that, okay, I can't do this business the way I want to because I'm emotionally too rooted at this point. So I have to send my son away. Like, that is incredible. And then of course it spurns on a whole lot of other things as it relates to capitalism and ruthlessness. And there's been essays, many essays written about that that I don't need to get into. We all know the film's notions of capitalism and greed and survival.
Yeah.
And I do love that about the film. There's no doubt that PTA is examining that here. That's just not what makes the film number 9 for me.
No,
not
there's
that alone.
Yeah, there's a loneliness in Daniel Plainview that we don't often talk about. And I think that relationship he has with HW, that adoptive nature to him, there is a beauty to that. There really is.
It's so good. And that, in addition to all of those other things, is what gets it to my number 9 here. And yeah, it is impeccably crafted. The direction, the cinematography, the score, like, it's all really, really fantastic. The only thing that held it back was, I think that, the duality, I never really saw that before. And again, I've always struggled with Paul Dano. So I've always had a few things that kept me from embracing it like everyone else, but I've really come around on it in recent years. So yeah, it now sits at number 9 for me for the decade.
I'm about to eat crow a little bit here because I've always said that while I love There'll Be Blood, Punch Drunk Love is my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson film. But it's hard to deny the cinematic experience that is There'll Be Blood. And that was a formative film for me. When I saw that in 2007, I was really excited for it, but I was not ready for the type of film that it was. The way it basically doesn't exist in any type of genre. It's one of the most genre-bending films I've ever seen. It is at times a horror movie, a comedy, a historical drama, a Western. It's like all of these things without actually being any of those things. It's a film that's just so hard to classify, and I think because of that, it's kind of the it's the film I tend to go to when I say what is the best representation of cinema and filmmaking from the 2000s. I think There'll Be Blood is one you have to have in that conversation, just given the scope of it, which is why it's my number 5. I have it all the way at number 5, and I'm ready to admit I think it is PTA's best film. I will rewatch Punch Drunk Love more often, simply because it's 90-some minutes.
Film. That's still top 3 PTA for me.
That's my number 2. I think we have the same top 3 in that regard. Then I'm assuming There'll Be Blood's in your top 3. I'm not sure if it is. Yeah. So then it's for you. It's The Master. I think that's your favorite, right? That's my number 3. So I think we do have the same top 3 in that regard.
Yeah. I'd go Master, Blood, Punch Drunk, but I mean, in a lot of ways they're interchangeable.
It's one A, B, and C. It's one A, B, and C. With even like Magnolia might even be my 1D if I'm being honest. I'm not really sure.
Sure. Yeah.
But There'll Be Blood was sort of the formative film for me. It was the film that made me want to study film in some way, or at least participate in the analysis of film. It really was that formative experience for me. So I really can't overlook that. So I do have this at number 5. You have it at number 9. We cross over once again. I think it is quite a masterful experience.
All right. That leads us to your number 8. So what do you have at your number 8?
You're going to have this on your list. I know you're going to have this on your list.
Okay.
In the Mood for Love from Wong Kar-wai.
In the Mood for Love. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Where do you have this on your list?
I have this at number 2. This is my number 2 film of the decade.
Good for you, man. Good for you. Awesome movie. I what I love about this film, and we talked about this a little bit already during our awards portion of this episode, is, again, it's sort of another one of those quasi-romance films, but this is sort of an anti-romance film in some ways. It's basically a story about the struggles of not wanting to act on your romantic impulses, even if you know that they're there. And in the case of In the Mood for Love, it's sociopolitical. It's the time of 1960s Hong Kong, and how even just the idea of feeling infatuated by someone that's not your spouse will get you into trouble, and you'll be judged for it. You're always being looked at. That's why the cinematography for this movie is so good, because it's almost as if you're always being spied on. You're always being watched, whether it be your neighbor or whether it be while there's no government-like entity that's spying on you in this movie, it almost feels like there is. Like it almost feels like your phone is bugged, and
you feel like there's eyes on you at all times.
Yeah. It's kind of a prison movie. I almost feel like wanting to call this a prison escape movie.
That's why the characters, they are feeling trapped, which is why the cinematography, as we were talking about earlier, is so crucial to this film. Like the framing is a genuine character here.
Yeah. Which is why the only way that they can reciprocate their feelings towards each other is through that form of role play, because it's through someone else's infidelity, their respective spouses. So that's the only way that they can do that, because that's really the safest way for them to do that at this time. I think it's a very interesting and well-layered film that almost feels kind of dystopian. I think we talked about that before when you talked about your favorite scene from this film during our Scenes of the Decade, is that it feels like a dystopian setting despite the historical backdrop. It almost feels like a science fiction film at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And I love that vibe. It's very haunting and just very strange. It took me a few watches to really understand everything about it, or at least
Yeah.
have some interpretation of everything. But now I absolutely love it.
No, I completely agree. I echo everything you're saying there. The geopolitical changes of Hong Kong that linger in the background are such a pivotal aspect to this film. The social pressures that they feel, whether they're happening or not, is a different story, but they certainly feel it, and that
Yeah.
does give them pause as to whether they engage in this romanticism that might be blossoming between the two of them. But that's what makes their reenactments so fascinating, right? Because the line between reality and make believe is blurred. It becomes
Yeah.
unrecognizable to them at a certain point where one of them eventually has to draw a line in the sand. And we talked about that a lot for best scenes of the decade a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
That final rehearsal scene between them it's just fantastic. I find something new in this every single time I watch it, and the more I think about it, the more I consider its themes, the performances. I nominated both Tony Leung and Maggie Chung earlier in this. I had Wong Kar-wai for a Best Director nom. I believe both of us had it for Best Cinematography, a win earlier in this as well. So
I think it's the best shot film of the decade.
Yeah, it's a captivating film through and through. The craft, every single aspect of the craft is in peak form, just truly elite, and I just love it. Like, yeah, this is a film that I just keep coming around to more and more and more, and ultimately I settle at number 2. I think it is the number 2 film of the decade.
We are at your number 8 now. Then we already have 5 crossover.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. We share the same brain. All right. I don't think my number 8 is on your list, so I look forward to delving into the Coen brothers here. No Country for Old Men is my number 8 film of the decade. I think this is one of the very best picture winners. There is not a false note, and its perspective of the world I just find so fascinatingly nuanced. And I guess to get a little pretentious with this, because similarly to There Will Be Blood, we can talk about the performances, the Coens writing and direction, and the theatrical experience, which is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. But what makes the film the best film of 2007 for me, and as it sits here at number 7 on this list, is how it explores this world in relation to spirituality. Like, when we're digging beneath the veneer of the film's tension, it is this duality of spirituality that I find absolutely compelling. It's so captivating here. Like, Shigor is this psychopath, of course, and he represents the cold brutality of life and fate. You could say that he acts as his own god. He's not necessarily an all-powerful god, but he does have a power over others that get in his way. He has the physical prowess to manhandle anyone he wants. He uses a coin to interpret fate. That means good and bad things can happen to anyone at any time. And then you juxtapose that to Sheriff Bell, who finds himself overmatched. There's a pivotal scene later on in the film, or late in the film rather, where he's talking to his uncle Ellis, and he discusses why this chase has impacted him so much. And he begins to articulate that he's met something that he can't fully understand. He can't keep up with Shigor. He's feeling lost throughout the entirety of it. And then he says that he hoped God would intervene in some sort of way, but he didn't know how that would happen. And that whole conversation, I think, is fascinating when you see how all of it crystallizes at the end of the film with its ideas on faith in this stirring way, where Bell talks about this dream that he had. And in this dream, he's talking about his quote unquote father, which is left purposefully ambiguous to imply something more spiritual. And there comes
Yeah.
a revelation for Bell that God was actually there with him the whole time. He just didn't really know it. And it weirdly creates this hopeful ending in a landscape that is otherwise hopeless. That I find very Coen's for one, but it's very moving. That duality is very, very moving. And I love how the Coens and Tommy Lee Jones play it as a matter of fact. It's a revelation not built on sentimentality, but rather a true profundity that I think interweaves real nicely with the film's intense bleakness that I love. For we could talk again. People have talked about that ending and the final actions it has, how bleak and dire it seems. But I think the poetry of this film, with the spirituality, there's still like a weird hopefulness to it that I love, and that to me is what I'm drawn to with this film. Everything we see on the surface I do think is great, but I think what's bubbling underneath is so much more fascinating, and there's a complexity to it that I love. And that's ultimately why No Country for Old Men sits here at number 7 for me.
Can you believe we lived in a world where No Country for Old Men and There'll Be Blood were the two front runners to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards? Two movies like this that are actually really challenging movies, like not the kind of movies that you would expect the Academy to go for even at that time. That was sort of a turning point for what the Academy was going for and what they were responding to. I think that makes it such a fascinating film. It is certainly one of the 10 best films of 2007. I'm looking back at my 2007 list, my updated list. I think I have it around number 10. So I feel like the hateful man here that says I don't like the movie. I love this movie. I think it's really good. And yet it's not quite one of my favorites of the decade because they're just these other films that I respond to more so. And that's really the only difference there. Even, there are other Coen Brothers films I like a little bit more than this, just Fargo and Barton Fink and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But I think it's one of their best technical achievements. Certainly one of their best shot films for sure.
Yeah, no, it's the craft is impeccable. And again, that's been talked to death. I didn't really want to emphasize that as much here because that it is an astounding technical achievement, but I also think it's a captivating thematic exercise that takes full advantage of that craft, of those performances, and again, not just Bardem, but Tommy Lee Jones and Josh Brolin and everyone here really. Like there is a gripping tension that will leave you completely gripped to your seat, but that's not the whole story, at least not for me. And again, that's where I get the whole like, come on, like, can we just talk about the movie? And like, look,
there's more to it.
That's fine.
Yeah, for sure.
I just feel like there's more to it than what we see there on the surface. And I've gotten some pushback about that before on the whole, the good old Twitter sphere, and that's fine. But yeah, I think the spirituality of that film, which again is a very
deep
Coen
movie.
thing to do.
It's a deep movie. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it gives that film a deep profundity that I love. And that to me is the difference. That's why it sits here at number 8 for me.
Yeah. I think that's fair. It's a very deep film.
All right. Number 7 to your number 7. What do you got?
My number 7. This is a film I actually like a little bit more since we did our 2002 retrospective. I had it at number 3. I'd probably rise it to like number 2 at this point now, and that's Spike Lee's 25th Hour.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, and I think what makes this film age so gracefully is